Good evening, Holliston. Welcome to the Select Board meeting for January 19th. I get that again. For Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. This evening we will be hearing a relatively robust agenda, starting as we always do with a coronavirus community update. Joining us virtually this week will be our Emergency Management Director, Fire Chief, Mike Cassidy. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And if technology could load my slide deck, please. Delightful. And next slide, please. So since last week, unfortunately, we've had an additional 47 new cases come onto our cases in town. We have had no recovered cases since the board met last on Monday, which means that the last time that we had any cases cleared from our active case list was on January 4th, when we had 71 cases total removed by our public health nurse consultant. There have been no additional COVID-related fatalities. We have 172 active cases, which, as you see, are spread out over 110 addresses. We have 65 single cases at single-family homes. We've got multiple clusters at single-family homes. We still have just a few cases at the elderly housing complex. We've got several cases at the long-term care facility, but as you can see, we continue to increase and have more cases. Next slide, please. So until our nursing consultant tells us that we can take some of those cases from late December off, you will continue to see that we have a very, very high case count. Next slide. So when the state released their data last Thursday evening, our positivity rate was 6.39, which was still lower than the state's at the time, which was 7.99. So we were very pleased that we had a lot more tests conducted of Holliston residents during the 2-week period for the data that was released last Thursday. Next slide, please. We are not alone in the region in terms of being a red community. This is our 4th week in a row that the state has designated us as being high risk or red. Next slide. We continue to put out as much messaging as we can. Some of our messaging recently reminded folks that they should not be carpooling, and if they absolutely have to carpool, they should take steps to ensure that there is minimal chance of disease transmission taking place in that carpool. Next slide, please. The temporary measures that were implemented by the governor several weeks ago and then extended are set to expire on noon on Sunday, unless later on this week the governor decides to extend those. But right now it looks like those temporary measures should expire at noon on Sunday. Next slide. No change to this slide here, just a reminder of the different groupings and when people can expect that they would be eligible to receive the vaccine. But to assist you in understanding where we are in phase 1, if I could see the next slide, please. There are now 4 subgroups within phase 1 that are eligible to receive the vaccine. Those include COVID-facing healthcare workers, long-term care facilities, first responders, and congregate care settings. All groups will continue to receive their vaccination until complete, and each group's period of vaccination is rolling, and not all group members will be vaccinated on day 1 of their period. So when we look at certain groups in phase 2, those won't be eligible until at least to some point in February. I did have a meeting earlier today with the town administrator, our health director, and representatives of the school administration to discuss the plans for offering vaccines to school employees. And that is something that we continue to explore, the feasibility of being able to offer that locally, or whether or not we're going to be possibly part of a regional solution. And with that, next slide, and I will pause for questions.
Thanks, Mike. We'll start with our town clerk, our board clerk, Mr. Scarrow.
A couple questions for you, Chief. First of all, thank you once again for the presentation. It's nice to see it in a concise way. It's very helpful. Could you speak a little bit to the changes to the case counts? Basically, I noticed that it looked like the largest groups in terms of the ones that you had set aside for addresses, it looked like single-family homes, clusters, and single-family homes, individuals. Is there any correlation to neighborhoods at all with those single-family homes? And
it's an excellent question. There are a few streets where we see more than one house on the street, but I would not suggest that there is a lot of spread going on in neighborhoods.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we certainly do watch. And every time I get a street where we've already got cases, I look to see how close or far it is. Obviously, with some streets like Washington or Highland, 4 cases on Highland Street could be spread out more than a mile from each other.
Right.
But with some smaller streets, it definitely is possible that somebody could have been chatting at the mailbox, or we talked previously about informal gatherings around fire pits and that sort of thing. But I really don't see a lot of neighborhood spread taking place, and that certainly hasn't been reported to us by either Salmon VNA or the Community Tracing Collaborative.
Okay. And my other question for it, it's actually more of a request. Chris, could you go to the slide with the percent positive cases graph? Would it be possible on this slide, and I can show you how to do it if you need help with it, but could we add number of tests to this slide?
Absolutely. I have contemplated adding that. I've been trying not to make any slide or graphic too busy, but I agree, because as part of my weekly analysis that I've been publishing, I do often reference whether or not I see a link between our positivity rate going up or down as it relates to the number of tests being conducted during that same 2-week reporting period.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, especially now that we have some data points, what kind of correlation we're seeing between number of tests and percent positive rate, if it's a strong correlation or not. I'd be interested to see that analysis. So if we could add that, even if it's just like columns kind of gray in the back, just so we can kind of get a sense.
Sure.
If some of that is.
I can try and add that for this Friday's weekly update when I update the graphic then.
That would be wonderful. I really appreciate it. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Tina.
Hi, Chief Cassidy. Just a quick question. You mentioned that the temporary measures that restrict crowd size, indoor and outdoor, are due to expire on Sunday.
Yes.
Without the governor extending them, would that have an impact on Holliston next week? Any significant impact?
Not any significant impact. There are certain sectors of our community, perhaps those that have venues that they offer to the public, where their restriction size would change. But in terms of the majority of our community, you wouldn't see a lot of significant change by those temporary restrictions being lifted.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, a question regarding I think it's called the new viral variant of the coronavirus.
Yes.
We've heard it has recently been found here in Massachusetts. The description of this variant is quite stunning. A couple of questions on this issue. Number one, do we envision changing any of our protocols regarding public building usage to combat this more aggressive coronavirus impact? And secondly, are we gonna be treating any such cases if they were to develop the same way we would, as we would a normal coronavirus case? Will they be treated separately or the same?
Excellent
Track it.
questions. Excellent questions. So with regards to variant B117, preliminary data is consistent with a higher transmissibility. And I know that's something we've discussed before. Currently, it does not seem to be more severe in terms of hospitalization rate. And preliminary evidence suggests that the current vaccine will work against this new variant. So in terms of will this have any impact on public buildings? Will this have any impact on the way we've been mitigating the spread of the disease? I do not anticipate, based on what I've been hearing on calls with public health and with public health experts, I do not anticipate that there will be any significant changes. The same measures that we've been using since last March in terms of distancing, frequent hand washing, face coverings, reducing group sizes, minimizing length of contact, those all will continue to be the primary way. And this will not be the last variant that is discovered through testing. There is even talk of a few other variants that aren't as significantly higher in their transmissibility, but also, given the nature of this this virus and the way viruses do change over time, it's not unexpected that there would be variants found in surveillance and testing.
And so the second part of that is, will you be tracking any such impact of these new variants if they emerge?
Absolutely. I continue to keep track of the what the epidemiologists are saying and the researchers from the hospital community, both at the national level as well as the international level. I continue to track it, but I don't anticipate that, when we look at our weekly data for the community, that we would be calling out variant specific information. For us, it's all just still going to be, positive cases, in the same way that during normal public health surveillance, a case of influenza doesn't really narrow it down to whether it was influenza A or influenza B, just somebody had the flu. So we will continue to monitor, and obviously if something comes down from the state that requires us to address this differently, you'll be the first to know.
Thank you, Mike. We'll now turn to the public assembled on the Zoom call to see if there are any questions on the coronavirus community update. Any questions for Chief on this topic from anybody assembled? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next portion, Chief, which is your CARES Act programmatic update.
Great, thank you. Just one programmatic update. I do not have any requests for you this evening. Chris, if you could move to the next slide. But I was on a conference call earlier today, and they were sort of reviewing what they refer to as phase 4 of the coronavirus relief funds. And so this specifically calls out the fact that although the authorization to spend was extended from December 30th, 2020 to December 31st, 2021, for local municipalities, that did not come with any additional funding. So it is not likely that under the current legislation that we would expect another tranche of funding being made available to the municipality. There are additional funds in that legislation that was signed on December 27th, including additional funds earmarked for education, establishing additional funding for rental assistance. But in terms of whether or not there would be additional funding available as part of the municipal CVRF funding, based on what ANF was saying on the call today, they are not anticipating an additional disbursement available to municipalities. And again, they said we can continue to draw down on our previous allotment if we still had money available. But, I've been working with the town administrator, and I expect that during his mid-year report that he has prepared for tonight, he will give a high-level overview of some of our CARES Act spending to date.
Any questions on that? Beth?
No.
Tina?
None, thank you.
Chief, if you did mention this, forgive me, I thought I heard you say it, but regarding the Phase 4.0 educational component of $815 million, nobody understands what that's for yet. Is that correct?
That is correct. There has not been guidance to the states as to how much they would be expecting, and therefore the states have not been able to signal to local educational authorities what kind of funding that would look like. There have been discussions that it would probably be similar to the initial seed funding that schools received for reopening, which was referred to as ESSER. But we don't know whether it will be a little bit more or it will be a little bit less, but it will be likely a much smaller amount than the $225 per pupil formula grant that the town received last spring.
When could one expect directions on that portion of the funding to emerge from our federal partners?
I am expecting that once they get through the change of leadership tomorrow, and there is new leadership in both houses of Congress, I know that there's a very aggressive agenda in the first 10 days, and I expect that within 30 days, we should probably have more direction that's coming from the federal government and coming through ANF and passed on to local municipalities.
So just as a footnote, I know you're aware of this, and Mr. Hearn as well. When those directions, if you will, come out, I would hope that our partners in the schools will arrange a meeting with us to have a conversation about the impact of that funding on schools for the rest of the fiscal year and anything related to the CARES Act.
Our hope is that once there is direction, that we will be able to bring together all of those partners that have met before, not only to wrap up spending that has occurred as of December 31st, so that we can do our quarterly reporting to, in our case, ANF, in the school's case, DESE, for the beginning of March, but also so that we have a path moving forward in the coming months.
All right, Mike, well, thanks so much for the update. We appreciate that. Any questions from those assembled on the CARES Act programmatic update, Steve? Hearing none. Mike, thanks so much for your update and great work. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Move on to warrants. Mr. Sparrow.
Yes, we have one warrant this evening. I will make a motion to approve the warrant in the amount of $2,444,882.64. Of that, $1,192,334.26 is town payroll.
We have a motion to have a second.
Yeah, I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Anything else in there, Ben?
Nope.
All right. We'll move to public comment. Anything, Mr. Sparrow?
Yes, actually, I do have something this evening. As you probably are aware, we're working on Blair Square. Been working on trying to engage with a few different things. One of them being starting a public forum. We received some money from the Trails Committee to help the Blair Square Committee get some feedback and some input from the public concerning the plans. So the plan right now is for a forum on February 3rd. And our hope is to have some kind of portal like Front Street on the town website where we could have some additional feedback from the public concerning Blair Square if they can't make the forum. And as part of that, I'd like to have members of the Blair Square Committee, particularly Kevin, on February 8th for our meeting to go over kind of what's going on, what's happening, and to start getting the ball rolling. I see Kevin's online if he wants to add anything. He might be able to, depending on the chair's discretion. But like to, get talking to you two, just so we can make sure we're in the right place. so we can be on the warrant in May. That gives us a little bit of runway. If we have questions or we need things to do, we can get it done, so that way we can get things accomplished. So.
Kevin, I see you available tonight. Is there anything you wanted to add to what Ben just brought up regarding Blair Square?
No, but Ben, thank you very much. I'll probably send you a report a few days in advance of what I'm going to speak about, so there won't be any surprises. That's all.
Wonderful.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
How are you?
And,
Good to see you. Be well.
And that's all I have for public comment this evening.
Thank you, Ben. Great update. Tina?
I don't have public comment, but I do have a question for you, Ben.
Yeah.
What will how will the forum be held? That's a Wednesday, February 3rd.
Yes. Yeah, it'll be a Zoom call.
Okay.
It'll be on Zoom. We'll have all the information.
Okay.
We'll publish it. There's a press release that's going to be
Okay.
put out to Holliston Reporter soon. We're just probably designing out all the little details to make sure it's ready. And it'll be a virtual, and then there will be also, again, working with Chris and technology to have something on the website, so if people want to add their thoughts and comments to the plans, they'll be published online for that as well.
Okay, thank you.
You all
No
set?
comment, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. On behalf of the Select Board this evening, we wanted to recognize the tragic events that occurred last evening on Winter Street. There's been some news coverage that offers details involving the tragic loss of human life, as well as animal life and property. The efforts last night were heroic by reports of our Holliston Fire Department under very difficult circumstances. We want to thank the Holliston Fire Department and the other first responders for their work last evening. It's a very difficult time for everyone. On behalf of the board, we would like to extend our thoughts to the loss of life and the family members involved. It's a tragedy all around, and for the most part, the board will have no further comments regarding the circumstances and the details, as this matter is under investigation by the State Fire Marshal's office. So for that, we will move on with our agenda, while recognizing the events last night were just tragic, and our thoughts go out to the family. At this point, we are upon an item for the Front Street Forum. Is that scheduled for 7 o'clock? It is.
Do you want to do public comment for the callers?
If there are...
Public comment.
Okay, I'm sorry, Chris, could you repeat that?
We do have some public comment.
Okay, we do. So we will go to public comment from anyone assembled on the Zoom call at this point. Could you please raise your hand and state your name and address?
Zoom or telephone?
Right, that's a problem.
Ryan? Okay, again, if you're interested in public comment this evening, please raise your hand. Our technology director will recognize you. Kevin, you have a question. Go ahead.
Is this regarding Front Street?
In just a moment, we'll be entering the Front Street discussion. Right now, we're looking for public comment, Kevin, on general topics.
All right, hold on.
Thank you.
All right, Chris Byrne calling from 10 Winthrop Street. Can you hear me?
We can, Chris. Good evening. What's on your mind?
My wife Kathy and I live right across the street from the old Lex Auto Parts and now the Rail Trail Cafe. And just curious about the plans that were put in place and the crosswalks that were put in front of the house and the congestion that it's causing with the cones that are in front on Ed Daniels' property that owns the building now. And just curious about where the one-way is going to go. Is this a permanent situation here? Can we have more design concepts put forward? Or are we just going down one trail where we have no say in the matter whatsoever in reference to what happens to our view and what's the congestion in front of our house and the safety that occurs pulling into Winthrop Street and also planning to pull up into our driveway many times with cars parked right in front of our house from the rail trail.
Chris, thanks for your question. It's a little bit out of order. We're going to be taking up the Front Street matter in just a moment. The next item on our agenda will be the Front Street issue. So if you could just stand by real briefly, we're going to try to see if there's any other additional public comment on general matters before we proceed. So bear with me 1 second, okay? Anything else, Chris, out there? Okay. We will now move to the Front Street Forum to discuss the one-way traffic pattern. Do we need a vote to enter into a public hearing on this?
It's a forum, yeah.
Okay, okay. Chris Byrne, you had just brought in some concerns regarding your relationship on Winthrop Street to the property. Is there anything else you wanted to add about your concerns?
Thank you. I apologize for jumping in prior to, I thought we were on Front Street. I just assumed the Front Street and the Blair Square was one and the same.
That's quite right.
Again, we're just concerned about some of the safety issues that are coming to place where it's already a quagmire parking across the street there. We've addressed this issue with the board, I think 8 years ago, when number 2 through 6 wanted parking in front of his property. And the entire board agreed that there was a safety issue, along with Michael Cassidy, and at the time, I forget the chief of police at the time, also wrote a letter on behalf of some of the safety concerns pulling into Winthrop Street with cars backing out at that point. And we're just curious of some of the original plans of Front Street had, in Blair Square, had parking further down Front Street closer to Vine. And when they started putting in the black dirt, we just figured, okay, that's going to be beautiful, greenery right there, and maybe a fence marked in, and the parking would be pushed down along Front Street. And just curious of where the next plans are going to be into play, and who overall has a matter and a say in it with the town.
So there are some overlapping projects there, and you're right to point out some of it is Front Street, which we're talking about now. Some of it is the Blair Square development. Let's deal with the former right now. Tina, if you want to give Mr. Burns some feedback on the Front Street piece.
Chris, you had provided feedback shortly after the changes went into effect with some concerns about the crosswalk, the new crosswalk. Do those concerns still persist today? Are you still seeing, I think your comment was most people don't use it. They walk past it, they go down to Central, and they use the crosswalk down there. I'm just wondering if you've seen a change in pattern.
None whatsoever. Those crosswalks are not being used at all. It's just not.
And I'm here too, Tina. I think you and I spoke in the fall about some of these.
Yep.
Hi, nice to see you.
Yeah, same here. Okay, so you haven't seen a change in usage there at all?
Not really. I mean, I work from home, and I've been working here from home since March, and I have not seen a heavy use of it. Like I said, most people are down at they go to the end of the street and use that crosswalk, or by the time they get down here, they're already on the trail. They'll cut over. It's coming from Mudville. You're already on the trail. There's so many other ways to access it, but I haven't seen, any volume pick up since you and I spoke.
Okay, all right. So if you don't mind, I think we'll listen to whatever comments come through from public comment here during the forum, and then circle back around as a board to some of the specific concerns that are being raised.
All right.
Okay.
At this point, I'm going to ask our town administrator to bring a little bit of focus into the Front Street Forum, a little bit of background on what brought us to this evening's agenda item, and maybe help folks at home understand what brings this matter to us tonight. Travis.
Great. So one of the things, just to kick it off, and as we hit 7 o'clock here, hopefully everybody who's intending to join us tonight is with us. So just a little history. Essentially what we did, the town applied for the Shared Streets and Spaces grant program through Mass DOT. We were awarded a grant to try out a new traffic pattern, which we pitched through that program, including sort of a different way for pedestrians, bikers, and vehicles to access the area, trying Front Street as a one-way. And so up on the website, if Chris, you could just put up that general page, what we did, what the select board chose to do was to implement the one-way traffic pattern on Front Street as a pilot, and it was voted through April 1st of 2021. And then what we did was we put up a page here on the website for anybody to essentially provide their feedback for how this is working before any permanent changes are put in place. Obviously, there's a couple components here. One that was mentioned is the obvious sort of interaction between Front Street and Blair Square, the way that parking is there, which again is somewhat temporary in nature. A crosswalk was added, and then as you go forward up to the top of the screen of where this map is showing, obviously there's also the changes that have been made behind Casey's as the trail progresses through this area. So what I provided to the board leading into tonight is all the feedback that we received through this portal. We can get into that, and I know Ms. Hine has some follow-up with some of those people. Additionally, we got some feedback from our own staff, Chief Cassidy, the planner, and DPW on how this is working, any feedback that they have. And then also, you know, we can look, if we want to zoom out from just the Front Street discussion, we can look at this more holistically with Blair Square as well, with the GLM map that has been drawn up of Blair Square and Front Street that we've discussed previously, with other issues such as trash. So where we are right now, again, the Shared Streets and Spaces grant was sort of put this in motion, but all of the changes that the Select Board has put in place so far are temporary, and we're sort of here to discuss any steps that you'd like to take to potentially make any permanent changes.
John, can I jump in on that?
Please, go.
Chris, would you mind pulling up, if you can, the summary document? So we had the survey up. Everyone has had an opportunity through multiple different ways, Holliston Reporter, other places as well, to provide feedback. We had 29 unique responses, so not duplicates. 29 residents responded, excuse me, through that survey link. What I took a look at it, there were quite a few comments. I tried to capture the ones that were repeated the most often. So what is working well? Overwhelming response was better pedestrian access, overall better appearance in terms of just being less chaotic. The one-way on Front Street got quite a few respondents feeling like that was working well, and the angled parking. These were things that were identified as working well. What would you change? So here they're listed from the most common comments down to the least common comment. The majority of people who said they wanted to change something said they wanted to limit or remove the yellow or orange signage or posts or markers. There were quite a few people who felt making the one-way all the way down Front Street was a good direction to head in, no pun intended. Quite a few people wanted to see the walkway location being swapped so that instead of being on the side with the homes and the buildings, to swap it to the side with the parking. And the thought there, after conversation with some folks, is that that allows for more space for families, individuals, you know, unloading and loading their bikes off their car and so on. There were quite a few comments requesting more parking and additional one-way signs. There was a comment to add a stop sign at Vine and Winthrop. And then we had two unique individual comments made. One, return it to a two-way, and then another comment to remove the wayfinding signs in downtown Holliston, because another part to this grant was those signs that direct people either to the trail or from the trail to downtown, and it is intended for people on foot. So we got comments to that effect. And then questions, Chris, there are three. If you just scroll up a little bit. Thanks. Can overhead lights be added to the crosswalk on Central? Can another parking lot be built down at 260 Woodland? And can there be additional wayfinding signs posted for parking lots in the area or from parking lots to the trail? So that's kind of a summary of the comments that were out there. That's what I wanted to share.
Thanks. Any comments, Ben?
Just some general things. I mean, I'm interested to hear what people think about this particular project. I've had conversations in the past, and I think one of the things that, you know, parking is certainly important in this particular context, but I've heard Tina actually say this, and I think she's right. We need to let's think more about people who are wanting to walk and have pedestrian access, and what about them? And this is sort of a way for us to get to try something, and, you know, maybe it's not the right fit, and that's okay, but at least now we're starting to think about things, and let's try to reorganize and reconsider what's going on down in Blair Square on Front Street. To me, there's sort of like a couple unique things that I think we need to be thinking about. Like, you know, what about the one-way? Is the one-way the right fit? The crosswalk, you know, is that the right, you know, is that the right place for a crosswalk? Should it be, you know, what should we be doing with that? General pedestrian access, is the trail adequate, or should there be additional pedestrian access in terms of sidewalks or whatever? And the wayfinding signs. Those are, to me, those are the big things. I mean, there's certainly ancillary pieces to that, like additional signage about a one-way, stop signs, et cetera. But to me, those are sort of the four salient things that I think we need to kind of figure out from this particular exercise. One question I had, we don't have a lot of data about this, but with the DPW, did they give you any feedback about snow removal or for the storm that we had in December? Did they make any comments? I didn't see anything in Tom Smith's email about that. I'm just curious if they said anything.
So with the one-way, it was not necessarily an issue. I don't have that information, so like a specific report to that on snow in that event for that area. But I think essentially what was done, if I saw it after that storm, was everything to the left of the cones was essentially left as snow, right? It wasn't removed.
Sure.
And so as one lane, it was opened, and that's sort of what I saw.
Okay. So I think those are the things that I think I'm thinking about and that I'd like to hear more about from residents. And there might be other things that I'm missing, but those to me are the big things that I think we need to, as a board, come to some general understanding about. So those are my comments right now.
Tina, do you want to add anything at this point?
I have a lot to add, so I mean, I can go now. I don't see any hands raised. So I don't want to take too much time, and I don't want to cut anybody off who has comments to make. So I'm just going to pause for a second to see if we have public comment that wants to jump in.
All right. Anyone from the Zoom call wish to be heard on the Front Street one-way traffic pattern item? Please raise your hand. You'll be recognized. Max, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, everyone. How are we?
Good.
Hello.
So my only problem with the whole one-way is the walkway to the left of the travel lane. It goes to nowhere. So could we use that as another travel lane or make the parking better for the people? Or, I mean, because you're not going to walk from the snack shop to Vine Street. You're just not doing that. So I don't know what is the walkway for. And my only second comment would be, is that we're just stuffing Blair Square is supposed to be this nice, beautiful area for the downtown, for the rail trail. And all it is now is just filled with cars. So is that really the look that the town's trying to go with, is cars to Blair Square and cars at Coffee Haven and Casey's? That's all I got for you guys. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Max. Any other questions or comments? Please raise your hand. You'll be recognized. Kevin, go ahead. Kevin, you'll have to unmute.
There you go.
I think I unmuted. Kevin Conley from the Blair Square Committee. The plan looked kind of nice to us. We'd like to get as much space as possible in Blair Square so we can use the area to enhance Blair Square. We like the diagonal parking. We like the mirror image of the Casey side to make it look all the same. And again, if we could take more space from the street, that would be very, very nice. And I think the parking, diagonal parking down as far as possible, then have parallel parking right down to the bridge if needed.
Kevin, I believe we've received a letter from Walter McGrath on behalf of your committee endorsing the same. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
I think Walter's on there, yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. Next
you.
comment, if there is one. Raise your hand, you'll be recognized. Peter, go ahead. No? Okay, I thought Peter was weighing in. Hearing none, Ms. Hine, I think you might have the floor at this point because it doesn't appear as though there are any other public comments.
Well, we can maybe turn back for more comment if people want to jump in later. But I agree with Max's comment. I agree with Ben's comment. It's very car-centric. One of the most profound comments that I received, and I got it twice, one was from a resident I spoke to in person, and one was through the feedback survey, was we can do better than this. If Blair Square is a gem or a jewel for the town of Holliston, we can do better than what we currently have. And it's a challenge. I don't think it's a criticism. I think it's a challenge to us as a community to, do better. So let me draw your attention to 3 parking lots. One is at Stoddard, one is at Goodwill, and one is up at Pinecrest. When you arrive into those parking lots, you are struck by the natural beauty of your environment. There's landscaping, there's an attempt made to complement the natural environment that you're arriving into. I take the comments that I've received to the effect of we could do better, this is a jewel for our community. That's how I take those comments. To say that, when you arrive at Blair Square, you are arriving into a natural space, a beautiful space that is something that we appreciate and hold up in our community, and I think that there is a challenge there for the town of Holliston to do something that not only residents but also people who come to use the trail are really struck by, similarly to when you arrive at Stoddard, Goodwill, and Pinecrest. You're struck by the beautiful space. So I don't know how we move forward on this. This is a question I wanted to put before the board. Who becomes the champion for that? So I believe as a board we can make decisions about permanent changes in terms of sidewalks and crosswalks and signage. But in terms of that we can do better beautification effort, is that an expansion of the Blair Square Committee? Is that a new committee? I don't think so. Where do we go to get the answers for how to make Front Street be the complement to Blair Square and the rail trail? I'm not sure if I'm capturing the general feeling of the people who are here on the call, but that's sort of like the big picture. I agree that the walkway is not serving a purpose. I think that's a temporary change that justifiably should be undone. That then gives you back the 22-foot width of Front Street. We need 11 feet for a one-way lane, and if that's the direction the board wants to go in, that leaves 11 feet for other purposes. We hear about parking. We hear that angled parking is more attractive, more appreciated, I guess. And we got some information today related to 9 Green Street about how to set those angled parking spaces up. So I'm not sure if that's something we would set the town planner to, if that's something we would ask DPW to look at. How many additional angled parking spots can you get with the 20-foot by 10-foot at a 60-degree angle parking space fit into that Front Street area down to Vine Street? So I think the board has a decision in the future, not tonight, I understand, but a decision to make about one-way permanent, and that's one decision, and a second decision would be to extend one-way all the way down to Exchange Street. I think that's one decision, or it's rather 2 decisions. And then I think there's a third decision there, which is how and where to add additional parking. And I think there's a fourth decision, which is that big picture. How do we want to identify a group of individuals to champion the beautification of that area at Front Street? Because when you talk about removing those orange cones that delineate the triangle in front of what was the snack shop this summer, you're back to open pavement. And you're back to that lack of delineation that made Front Street a one-way. Is there beautification that can be done on the town side of that property to make that a permanent delineation, and maintain what we have there, which is a more, because I think that was Chief Cassidy's comment, was those cones actually calm some of the traffic flow and make it more manageable or more.
Well, the timing is good. As Ben indicated, there's going to be some feedback from the Blair Square Committee, and we've heard from Kevin tonight. I think there is a symbiotic relationship between the two, and we should be mindful about how they live together.
Okay.
I think the Blair Square project has a bigger scope, perhaps more money behind it. In addition to that, I think whatever the Front Street thing becomes needs to mirror the goals of making sure that Blair Square is a gathering spot. It's not, as Max put it, it's not a parking lot. It's going to be a central gathering space a green space primarily for the town to enjoy. So I'll keep that in mind as we hear from the Blair Square folks in early February and start pulling in some of this Front Street feedback to see how they can live together or change it. Travis, you have a question?
One point. So, just to Ms. Hines' point on the parking, DPW has been, has given me a couple sketches of how it would look, the number of spots and those types of things. But really, to a certain extent, they were sort of waiting also for direction on, they don't want to do anything that would impact Blair Square and those types of things. So I think at this point, in the letter from the Blair Square Committee and this conversation tonight, DPW can give you some sort of options and renderings and those types of things if that's where the conversation's going. I think, some of the points that were made about extending parallel parking down further, if that's something we want to talk about, they can obviously bring that back to you as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other?
Can I make one comment?
Please, go right ahead, Ben.
One thing I just want to be, just thinking about as we think about parking in this particular situation is that making sure that there's enough clearance here. We might look at it and say, if we move the one way to the other side, and we make parking and we move the parking a little more into Front Street, just making sure that there's enough clearance to be able to actually, turn, even with the angle parking, to make sure the cars can get in and out of there. I just think it can get a little, there's space, but we have to be careful that we're not trying to, put too much into a small space.
Can we just pull up the, image, Chris, if you would, the master plan, the bird's eye view with the changes to to Front Street there? I just want to point out where the walkway, Front Street, the rendering that has all of the signage on it.
The one that's on the website.
Thank you, yeah.
That one, perfect.
So you see the arrows coming down?
Yep.
The one-ways. Just to the right of that, where you see 40 feet, 22 feet, that's delineated there. It's grayed out, beiged out. That's delineated as the walkway.
Right.
That's an 8-foot walkway. So I think what we're hearing from residents is that the walkway serves no real purpose.
Right.
And so to your question about being mindful, your comment about being mindful of putting cars too much into the road, you would essentially have that 8 feet to play with on the opposite side.
Yeah.
Does that address your concern?
No, I think it does. I just want to be I want to put that question out there because to me, the other question I have, so the parking is certainly there. The other question I have, personally, is just sort of when you look at that intersection with Front Street and Winthrop Street, it feels like a lot of pavement right there. And I guess I would challenge anyone in asking the question, is there a way that could be improved too? So it doesn't feel like, to your point about beautification, to me it just looks like more parking, parking lot there's no parking kind of thing. It just feels like endless asphalt. And as we look at Blair Square and things like that, and it has a lot of potential to be a jewel, to be a beautiful place that people want to come to. And people do come to it now, and I think maybe even more people would come to it. But just thinking about it in terms of just, maybe overly aesthetic, is there a better alternative? Is there a better way that we can think about that entire area? Because I think, to me, part of it, the one-way on Front Street is certainly incredibly important and is a major part of this particular project, but I also wonder about that space in front of the snack shop. What does that look like, and is there something we can do there as well, or should do, maybe we can't, that could make that space a little bit more aesthetically pleasing?
Well, we have Chris and Kathy on the call, and I think it was Kathy who and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Kathy, so I apologize if I do. If you envision, right, and there are 1,000 different great ideas here, so I'm just going to put one out there, and this is why I do think we need someone to champion this.
Yes.
But if you were to take that tip of the triangle that's outlined in red there, and you were to extend it down with a tree line, you absolutely delineate Front Street and Winthrop Street, and that gives cover, it gives landscaping and screening for the residents on the Winthrop side. So they're not staring out over a very car-centric view of the tops of different cars. So, that's just one idea, but I agree with you, there's a lot of landscape, there's a lot of
pavement, and there's a lot of, and it's not, I think there's potential.
There's a consensus with respect to the board feedback and some of the public feedback, Travis, if I may, in so many words, suggest that as we think more on Front Street, there's a certain level of public works or public way improvements that could be conjured. And I'd welcome the input of our partners at Holliston Highway. They peruse that area, they know it well, and if there's an area to reclaim for green space, for example, carve up some of that area and or repave or what have you, I think that might be helpful as well to our thinking. The idea is less pavement, more green space. How can we achieve that? So if you could take some of this public feedback and get their input, I think that would be helpful, especially, as I mentioned, as we start to think about the Blair Square piece, because they are integrated.
Sure. As I said, they have a couple renderings on parking specifically. I can ask them to incorporate green space into that. One thing, and there's been a lot of information, so I apologize if I missed this, but the extension of the one-way further than we've currently contemplated, is that something that came up in the comments?
Yeah, we definitely received comments to say right now the one-way on Front Street ends at Vine. And so if you continue it down to Exchange, that was appealing to some people who provided feedback. I see the benefits for sure. Making changes to one-ways into a one-way is difficult to change. So I would be willing to entertain it because, again, it makes sense in a lot of different ways, and we heard it from comments. We have people on the call tonight. If they want to weigh in, I think now is a great opportunity for them. There are, I think, 3 houses that would be impacted. 3, maybe 4. Max, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think between 5.
Saying 3?
3, yeah. So there are 3 homeowners. 1 or 2 of them did provide feedback. So I think it would be something to consider, talking to them. I'm just looking to see.
Okay. So I guess just to the chair's point, I can certainly follow up with DPW on sort of getting you some more information on options to consider. Sounds like the one-way as it is currently, it seems like we're going towards a place of permanence, right? That is right now through April 1st is your temporary change. But then if we were to look at extending that, that's something that, wasn't previously contemplated. So I'd go back to the public safety folks and get more feedback on that as an option before permanence. Does that sound okay? I will follow up with both of those. Because I don't know, in all of the notes that we went into in the Shared Streets and Spaces application, that was ever contemplated. So the feedback that I received in the beginning sort of was based on this design.
Yep.
So let me just check in with them for feedback on that as well.
Thanks, Travis. Any other final comments? There appears to be.
Kathy have a question.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Chris.
Chris and Kathy have a comment.
All right. We'll start with, Bob Wideneck's got his hand up too. We'll start with Bob Wideneck. Go ahead, Bob.
Robert Wideneck, 40 Hemlock Drive. I'm not speaking for the Trails Committee itself, but I certainly support the plan as, the concept of the one-way and extending the one-way further may help out in terms of adding additional parking as well. In terms of cleaning up the whole large area of pavement between, Front and Winthrop and Central, I think I don't want to put this over to Peter or Kevin, but it almost could be an expansion of the study of the Blair Square to include that area. I know they don't have a survey of that piece of the right of way itself, but there is way too much pavement in that whole area, and that could be cleaned up. And I can envision a nice landscaped island in front of the Rail Trail snack shop in order to make a nicer landscape improvement and to improve the whole layout. But right now the parking is just mayhem. People are just pulling up, and every time they pull up a little farther and farther and farther. So they keep going into Blair Square. And so if you were to clean it up and have a nice pavement, curbing, maybe some bollards or whatnot in order to prevent it from encroaching further, that will give you more room on Blair Square as well. My thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Great feedback. Who else had feedback? Kathy Pierce, did you have feedback?
No, it was Kathy on the
Max
call.
said Kathy,
It was on the call, right, Chris?
Chris and Kathy Bryan.
Oh, Byrne. I'm sorry, Chris Byrne. Chris and Kathy Byrne, do you have feedback?
hit the star 6.
Hello? Chris, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, we're kind of technically challenged this evening.
Oh, we're all in the same boat. Good evening. How are you?
Good. So thank you so much. I am in violent agreement with Tina and the rest of you on having a little bit more greenery. I think it's, you guys are definitely building a park, and I think that that's very important. We want it to be a beautiful place. And so I'm not going to say much more on that. You've certainly touched on some certain ideas that we have thought of as well. I do think sprinkling the parking in different areas helps. Right, it certainly reduces that the clutter of cars and that sort of industrial look. And I do want to offer, you know, Tina and I stood on our front yard. It's rather elevated and stares right at Blair Square. It's an interesting vantage point, so I do want to offer that as an option as you start to go through your plans and such. If you would want to reach out to us, we are more than welcome to have people, you know, coming onto the lawn, taking that perspective and just looking at it. It faces CVS, it faces the parking. So that is certainly something that we would be, you know, willing to. We want to work with the town. We want, you know, we're agreeing with all the great ideas of making a little bit more green, less congestion, and just a fun area for everyone.
And to continue on that thought process, working with the town, I think Robert had a super suggestion in reference to making almost a greenery space right in front of the rail trail snack shop and delineating that one way. We're for the Front Street one way. I agree with Maxwell of getting rid of that silly walkway along Front Street. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Another aspect I thought might be important is as we clean up Blair Square, and I'd love to get involved with that, Kevin, an idea would be as we see people exiting their cars, they're just walking straight onto the trail across where years ago there were some beautiful flowers, some greenery, some grass, and maybe in the concept moving forward is maybe a split rail fence and kind of herd the masses that are parking there into certain parts of the trail where the split rail fence blocks people from just going across the greenery, but into a nice little path that enters the rail trail accordingly every 20 feet down the road as parking goes on. But as people move, go ahead.
Chris, I was going to pass along, you indicated an interest in working with Kevin in the Blair Square project. I think Ben Sparrow indicated there's a hearing coming up on February 3rd.
Correct. Yeah,
And,
February 3rd.
I think that would be a great opportunity for you to shed those details and your input for that project.
Thank you. That's outstanding. I look forward to helping out.
Thank you. Any other comments on the Front Street one-way traffic pattern pilot? Go ahead, Max.
So the last thing I would say, I think ideally what makes most sense would have it a one-way the entire length of Front Street. And if we could somehow come up with a better parking idea, I'm for that idea. If the whole thing was a one-way and actually parking was diagonally, how they be off the road far enough, maybe what they did behind Casey's with the like the timbers for parking on Blair Square area so people don't drive so far onto the trail, but have it organized more. And I think that would be the best idea because then you get more parking. It's a cleaner look. I think that's the way to go. And thank you for your time.
Appreciate it, Max. Any other final feedback before we move on our agenda on this item?
I have one other comment. I was looking at a map online, and just one of the things that I thought was interesting when I looked at this is that when you look at it on Google Maps, it almost looks like Front Street comes off of Winthrop Street, and it's not a giant parking piece. And so one of the things we're talking about green in the middle of in front of the snack shop. But also, I think one of the things we should also entertain and look at is, you know, we're kind of talking about it, we're dancing around it a little bit, but stealing back a little bit of that space on the other side that's next to Blair Square from pavement to be more green space or, you know, parking solution. Yeah, and I think we can cut back on that. Maybe we think about cutting back on that side as well. and that might fall under the purview of the Blair Square Committee without having to change the charge.
All right, I think we have exhausted all public feedback on this matter. We will move on this evening to the next item on our agenda, which is comments from our town administrator, Travis.
Excellent. So I'm going to get into a little bit of a summary. Tomorrow will be 6 months for me in the town of Holliston, and a little update leading into beginning budget conversations on the next item. We'll, I think, tie a number of things together and sort of present a larger picture. I'm going to try to get through this as quick as possible. It's a lot of area, so I think if there are a lot of questions that, certainly some of these things I can come back on in the future.
You want to steal the spotlight tomorrow?
Tomorrow?
Yeah, for your 6 months. All eyes on Mr.
Oh,
Hart
yeah,
tomorrow.
Travis.
That's what we'll be celebrating,
Anything else on the wall?
or acknowledging tomorrow.
Oh, that's
Your
right.
6 months.
I had not thought of that. That's right. Yeah. No, tomorrow should be all about me.
Okay, got it.
Good.
Okay.
Like
So let me get in here. So I'm just going to go through this, and it's going to seem a little quick. So if anything sort of doesn't make sense, please stop me. Otherwise, I think a number of these things are really just updates on what we've been going through. So let me. Oh, there we go. So starting off, the select board set their goals right before I started in July. The June-July timeline. Here are the three sets here from the chair, vice chair, and the clerk. Successful transition to new town administrator, public works, infrastructure, and governance committee recommendations for the chair. Transportation, healthcare costs, town and employee side, and sustainability with a focus on water conservation from the vice chair. The clerk took a bigger swing with 5, improving capital expense, and developing facilities management budget. Obviously, we'll be discussing in the upcoming budget process. Improving communications with the FinCom, I think we've made strides in. Laying groundwork for a strategic plan, we'll discuss at the end here, and work on retirement liability plan. I think we'll also be approaching as we get towards the warrant. The FY21 budget Q2 update was presented to the Select Board and the Finance Committee in January, most recently, so I'll just summarize it where we were. On the revenue side, we're trending positively, and March is a big time for where motor vehicle excise comes. The state aid came in higher than was anticipated in July, and so we adjusted at the December 5th special town meeting. On expenditures, we look like we're in good shape, although some of that has to do with the support we got through the CARES Act, which I'll highlight at the end as well. And we're monitoring a couple budgets that have been impacted by COVID, and just normal overages. Nothing that is currently concerning. So currently on FY21 through Q2, we're trending positively. On the personnel side, what we've done in chronological order after July, so August, we essentially all the contracts in town were up on June 30th. So department head contracts were tied up for the most part in August. The HPA worked out a 1-year contract to get us through this fiscal year, and we are now in negotiations going into a 3-year contract starting for FY22. The police chief's contract was tied up later in the October-November timeline. The healthcare consultant was engaged on healthcare. That is currently ongoing, which is why I don't have a date next to it. The non-union COLA was addressed as it had been taken out in the middle of the COVID hitting in the middle of the budget cycle. When state aid came in, that was added back in at the December 5th town meeting. And most recently, the DPW union, the laborers, also agreed to a 1-year contract through this fiscal year. So looking ahead, essentially everything that we've done is now coming up again. The PEC agreement is still needed. That runs through this fiscal year, although we are still in conversations on that. HPA, laborers, department heads, and non-union personnel all still need to be addressed moving forward. And then I would mention that the department head performance reviews are in process right now and should be completed by the end of this month. For traffic response, also in August, we sat down and had the Lowland Industrial Park Traffic Forum, which resulted in a memo from the town administrator to the select board with some options. The select board chose a few options, and we also sat down with Mass DOT for 2 site visits. And one of the options that was selected from the forum was an application to Mass DOT for a Woodland Street heavy commercial vehicle exclusion. I followed up with them today. That is still pending. It is with the Boston office of Mass DOT. So we have a regional office. The Boston office also needs to sign off. But I have indicated that we have been waiting quite a while, and we would like a response. Also, from the memo and our conversations led to a special town meeting, Article 15, for traffic engineering studies. That RFQ was put out, and the responses are due this Thursday, the 21st. It highlights two areas. One, Lowland Industrial Park with Bullard Street, Lowland Street, High Street, Locust Street, and Fifth Street, and then also South Street, which is, we have all heard, a significant problem area when it comes to truck traffic related to the industrial park on the other side of town. So all of those, what we would hope to be addressing through a traffic engineer that will come out and get us the data that we need to engage with Mass DOT, potentially on heavy commercial vehicle exclusions if they apply. Additionally, most recently, we heard from a resident on incidents with trucks hitting wires. There were 3 police reports within this previous calendar year on trucks hitting wires, and a report of other incidents beyond the ones that triggered police incident reports. Since then, I followed up with the business that the truck was going to and from, also Verizon and Comcast and Mass DOT. The IT director with lieutenant from the police department also has sort of gone out and taken a look. I think, there's a number of ways that this is going to end up going from the Verizon Comcast aspect rather than having a sort of pointing contest. I think, both of them will most likely have to be engaged in seeing if wires need to be raised. If signage is needed, I would expect that Mass DOT would approve of that and that potentially Verizon or Comcast would be responsible for putting that up. And then additionally, the businesses in that area that may be able to increase their communications to trucking. The concern has been that, as the third-party trucking has become more common, they're losing communication with direct drivers. But I think, through communication with them, we should hopefully be seeing some action on that and more to come on those. Again, for the items that we put on the special town meeting for these issues, quite a few have already been put in place. Capital budget has quite a few aspects of it. The facilities manager sort of owned aspects of it have been put in motion. Additionally, for the community preservation, the 3 largest items within there, the upper town hall floors, the town hall windows, and library facade. The invitation for bids have been posted to the website and on combis already, and those are due in the coming month. For roadway, drainage, sidewalks, that's a project. There's supplemental funding essentially for the area known as Mudville. We expect that to start in the spring through spring 22, same timeline that was laid out in the warrant. Article 8 and 9 were projects, plans for the sidewalks and water system modernization. Ben Sparrow, Sean Reese, and myself had the kickoff meeting with Stantec, and we'll be continuing to discuss those. Coming up, the bid documents for Winter Street were signed in January, so that should be moving ahead. The water treatment plant we'll be discussing as soon as there'll be a larger discussion on the 25th when we have the water rate hearing. We're following up with the SRF, and if it turns out that the SRF is not going to be an option, we'll be prepared to put the bid documents out anyway, but I'll get into that. Moving along, though, stormwater on track, 9 Green Street, as Ms. Hine mentioned, we had a meeting earlier today, and that is moving along. The contract specifies that they will get us something within the timeline to contemplate potentially an article on our May town meeting. Public safety, the TAC equipment, that equipment has been procured, and some signage has already been acquired as well related to TAC-specific requests. And the traffic sound engineering, as I said, is due on Thursday. I already have 1, which is good, and I expect to have at least 2 others.
Can you go back real quick? I just wanted to point out one item. That's great tracking on special town meeting articles. I know you've been with us 6 months, but it might be interesting to go back, 1 or 2 town meetings to follow up on the various articles, make sure we're cleaning up and following through on some of those projects. We meet once a week. We move in and out of that space, but if there's any way you could track down with the department's assistance any other special town meeting or annual town meeting tasks that might still be undone, I think that might be worth the effort, Travis.
Absolutely.
Thanks. keep going, sorry, buddy.
So for some ongoing items, I've also been included as needed with Blair Square activity. As I think we've sort of noticed, Ben Sparrow has sort of been point for the select board with that group. So with the committee specifically, most recently we've heard about a farmer's market. I'm currently in discussion with town council on options, and I've reached out to a couple other communities to sort of see how the finances work from the town end. With some of the concerns we brought up, that with the understanding that the select board is interested in pursuing that if we can make that work, but there's a couple concerns that need to be addressed, so I'm tracking those down. Solid Waste Initiative, I think what we'll see is that the DPW will be installing, we'll work with the group of high schoolers who will be part of, closing out their program at the schools, and then we'll look to transition that eventually to the DPW normal trash pickup. The interest is there for trash pickup in Blair Square, and although it has been tried in the past and was not successful, I think, with dog waste stations, those things, we're in good position. Front Street, obviously, we just had that discussion and we'll continue to. I've been trying to be with the EDC as much as possible as needed. We are, looking for long-term staffing needs there, and Peter will be on tonight for their budget presentation following this. Additionally, trying to support the governance committee as needed, and just as an update for the DLS technical assistance, I got a response from them. I can't remember which day, but it looks like early summer, so probably right around after our town meeting, the June timeline, we would look for an engagement. They'll start to schedule a time to speak with every aspect of essentially government. I think that's going to be a great exercise to go through. It may dovetail with some of what the governance committee is doing, and it may reach other areas that the governance committee is not going to look at.
That's not something to overlook. That's a significant action, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think working with the governance committee, the DLS technical assistance, it's been some time since we've done that, right?
90.
Yeah, it's 20 plus years, and having such outside but state-informed technical guidance review our operations is invaluable. It's free, and it's going to be very, very helpful for the governance committee to see as well. I'm excited for it. I think it's a great review, and it's also important. I mean, you're new, so you're still getting believe it or not, getting your feet wet, and looking at the systems. It'll give us all some insight as to how we can do things better. I think that's a great development, Travis.
Well, very exciting, and I think a lot of the groups, once I sort of get more information from them on how they'd like to roll out the engagement, reaching out to a lot of the groups that I've had some initial conversations with in town, and putting them in, getting them a schedule. So that'd be great. Supporting the stipend committee as well. I think we mentioned last week they did put out 2 surveys, one towards in town with stipends, and then one to the 14 communities they were looking at. So they should be discussing and coming back to us soon, probably in the early February timeframe. And I will continue to work with them. Other ongoing projects, the water treatment plant, again, SRF is going to be sort of the last sticking point. We'll have to make a decision that we'll probably have a conversation on as early as next Monday, the 25th, when we get into the water rate. And, there's going to be a decision whether or not we want to continue to wait for the SRF, just put out the bid. I think we can talk about the pros and cons of both, but I'm comfortable that project won't be held up for that reason. Again, the sidewalks and water system modernization we'll continue to go with, but that's been kicked off, which I think is great. The Dude Solutions rollout is another one that we're going to be hearing about quite a bit as we move forward into the FY22 budget process with James Keith. But then also just, our capital operations in general moving forward is going to really impact the way that we've been operating. Continuing some of the cost-saving initiatives that have been highlighted previously from the facilities manager, electricity and natural gas, the annualized savings there about $70,000 plus by committing to annual amounts over what we were getting based on fluctuating market rates. Solar arrays, we're looking at the fire chief engaged one instance that is annualized savings is around $1,200. Sustainability coordinator, the facilities manager reviewing other options for municipal buildings, $1,750 certainly looks like it would be a promising option. Schools being another one that in the long term we're going to need to consider, but also engage the schools in the conversation. Marshall Street I will talk about in a second. And then the sustainability coordinator is going to be up tonight on budget, so I won't get into it too much, but some of the initiatives that he's had, we've continued to look at, potential savings or potential, ways that we can change our operations when it comes to trash recycling and food waste.
Travis, on the cost savings initiatives under the facilities manager, wasn't he also looking into telecommunication tower revenue?
Yeah, so there's been conversations. Yep.
Months ago, right?
Yeah, so there's been conversations on one that sort of hadn't been paying what was agreed to, tracking those things down, and then one that had been drawing our power for their equipment without sort of compensating us.
So it's another prong of facility manager review of utilities. In that case, it's telecommunications.
Absolutely.
Got it. Thank you.
And I think so when those clear up and there's something, further report, we'll bring those back as well. And then as he had discussed in his update to you, the next step is probably going to be moving on to the other types of contracts that we may be able to realize some benefits. HVAC and custodial being two that I put here, but there are others. So on the Marshall Street on this Thursday night, just so everybody's aware, there is a public hearing for that. There will be a couple action items for the board when it comes to signing to move ahead with some things. There have been some developments as well. So just high level, this is about turning a cost center, the old dump that was capped, into an environmentally beneficial revenue generator. Some major dates that I have here. The engagement was November 19th, although I think the 19 proposals that were solicited were received in May of 2019. So, it was quite a process before Sol Systems was selected. The public hearing, as I said, will be on Thursday night, 21st of January, and the target mobilization that we'll hear about on Thursday night is still for the fall of 2021. So the revenue assumption on the right side of the screen here really begins when the lease is signed, because the way that it is written is that a quarter of the first-year lease payment is essentially due at signing. Beth will get into that on Thursday, but I just want to update a couple things. The total revenue package that had been discussed was pilot and lease payment in the $400,000 plus range together. The way it works essentially is the way that it is worked out between the assessors is if it's pilot, the payment in lieu of tax, it goes up higher, then the lease may need to be adjusted down. So now that the pilot has been finalized at $57,696 per year, that was worked out between Kathy Pierce and and Beth with Sol Systems. The lease payment can now be finalized with the agreement that we'll be looking at. So that will be about $373,464 per year. The net metering is an amount that can fluctuate based on the output of the system, right? If you think of a very bad winter when those are covered in snow, we're going to have less output from the solar product. But generally speaking, it is estimated up to $79,000 per year. And I will be coming, as we approach the warrant for May, to look at the potential of establishing a revolving fund that could support the recycling center and some other similar activities within town using specifically the net metering. So the general fund could benefit from the $57,696 of pilot and the $737 from lease, whereas a revolving fund that may be able to support and increase our ability to provide services at the recycling center and beyond could be beneficial. That will be a longer-term discussion that we'll have as we lead up to the warrant.
Those first items, number one and number two, just to be clear, those revenue projections were not part of your model that you gave us about a month ago.
No, we did not have
This is still developing. We'll learn more about the timing for FY22 Thursday evening, but it's safe to say there will be some revenue benefit in FY22.
Yes, when the lease is signed, there will be sort of guaranteed revenue. And we can discuss all the mechanics of that on Thursday night in terms of the timing, and I have some planning on that, but at this point, that's our next step, once the lease is signed.
The information on the right under solar revenue, this is the first time I believe it's being presented publicly in this way with these ideas attached to it. Okay. So you've not,
I'm not sure, quite honestly, of
this is the
where
first time you're publicly sharing it.
This is the first time I'm publicly sharing it. And so these are obviously per year over 25 years, and so the way that it would have been probably, if it had been referenced in previous meetings as this was being developed, the idea was being developed and ideas were being pitched, it probably would have been references either 20-year aggregate amounts versus 25-year aggregate amounts. Select Board town meeting took action to allow for a 25-year agreement, which increases the overall sort of picture, financial picture here. And so these are based on the 25-year amounts in Group 4, which we've locked into for all three of these revenue categories. Just highlighting very quickly some of the grants we've discussed. The Green Communities is a team led by the IT director. This year hit, the largest amounts for school and Pinecrest, although there were others. Continuing to look at the green communities and what that entails. And this is just a look at sort of where we've been in the last 6 months. Looking ahead, the green communities will be coming back to you on the Upper Charles Rail Trail, the Behind Casey's project. Again, great work done by the planning department. Karen Sherman sort of leading some of the planning of it, supporting the group as the application went through the rail trail group. And then also DPW, who oversaw a lot of the work that otherwise, normally would have been bid out. The cost of the project could have been substantially greater if it done so. So quite a bit of work was done by our actual DPW department. And I think the outcome, there are still some components of the original design that need to be flushed out that we'll be looking at the budget with. But right now, obviously, functional, people using that space. The shared streets and spaces we just discussed, and I would mention one of the components we did not discuss in our conversation earlier is that of the $12,000 that we received for that grant, there is a remaining balance that we can look at for any of our finalizing plans, and I did get an extension through May 31st for those dollars. The recycling dividend program, the sustainability coordinator could obviously highlight, but that's actual dollars in. And then the local rapid response planning, I've received indication that we will be getting assigned a consultant on this, although I do not have that information yet. But just on the right here, it would be for the village commercial specific area, which includes essentially everything from downtown, quote unquote, to Blair Square, and a couple other areas. You can see it's pictured in red. So more to come on that once we get assigned a consultant. And the group that would include that would be a representative from the EDC, a representative from the Select Board, somebody from HCAT, and then somebody from Holliston together, which will be John Drillham. Getting towards the end here, so just as the Chief mentioned earlier on CARES, this has obviously helped us immensely get through the first half of this fiscal year. Very high level. If you look at the $1.3 million that the town received, plus the $600,000 based on a per pupil basis that the schools received, just looking holistically on everything that we've sort of accomplished with this. We're through about $1.65 million when it comes to spending and encumbrances, leaving a balance that looks substantial. But again, I would just highlight that we have ongoing costs that we've tied to this. One is the municipal buildings cleanings, the 2 times per day high-touch surface is still ongoing at a number of municipal buildings. The public health surveillance costs are still ongoing. Remote meetings, we've had some very well-attended remote meetings that have required that we continue to maintain our support that the board authorized with an IT support, temporary IT support staff, and additionally some costs that we've incurred for increasing our capacity, and then the additional crossing guards. So those are about our monthly ongoing, on the town side specifically, ongoing costs. So we'll be coming back, the Chief and I, with more of this as we develop, and as the chair alluded to earlier, really tying in sort of the school admin with this as well on what we're going to be doing. It's going to be interesting to see what we're getting in the next couple of rounds from the federal government. But this is where we are. It's helped immensely. There's more to come on it. The extension is helpful. It helps with these ongoing spending. But this is also going to impact 22. I think we're going to see a lot of budgets that sort of people see their operations changing and not going back to quote-unquote normal in FY22. For the look ahead, the ATM, we're now starting budget prep tonight through March. We're going to start to talk about the development of 3-year budget to revenue projection. That's something that, I begin to bring to the board, but, we'll want to make public and begin to discuss with the Finance Committee moving ahead as well. One thing I'm going to prioritize between now and most likely the end of February is taking our capital needs and turning it into a viable 5-year capital improvement plan. That's going to take some vetting with a number of groups, but it's really, taking the information and presenting it in a more traditional 5-year capital improvement plan So I'm excited to do that. And the warrant is currently open through March 29th. And I think, we're going to have a relatively robust warrant. I think we're going to hear from a number, we use the word robust a lot. We're going to hear from a number of groups. We're going to have quite a few items. For policy updates, things that I'm tracking that I haven't been able to get to in the first 6 months just due to timing, I'd like to look at the solid waste recycling policy. Right now I'm working off of a contract with Harvey's and some, town meeting votes and those things. I think the policy development is really needed. I think the sustainability coordinator is going to be helpful with that. Procurement policy, I think we need to update based on the Municipal Modernization Act. Gift grant policy, I think we need to look at just for ease of sort of some of our meetings. And then a general policy handbook development, I think, is needed in this town and is, in coming ahead, something I'd like to focus energy on. Additionally, the master plan is something that I think we all recognized before I came in is needed. I think it ties in a few of the things I just talked about, but it's a much broader approach. The 1999 master plan has been digitized, added to the website, and dispersed to all the groups that may use it. And then I'll be looking to, with this board, collaborate with other boards such as the planning board, zoning, EDC, and others to sort of determine, what our priorities are on a master plan. I would say sitting here today, most likely what we need is a brand new master plan and not an update of the 1999 master plan, but I won't make that assumption before we get more information. I think a resident survey, generally speaking, may be helpful in this as well, rather than just relying on our boards and committees, although we do have dedicated members of all those groups that will provide quite a bit of feedback. And then I'll be looking for grant opportunities, obviously, if we can get some of the ones that exist out there. A lot of them are targeted, right? So the LRRP that I just talked about is targeted to the downtown area. Mass development, generally speaking, is going to target their grant opportunities as well. But if we could get one that would sort of work with us on a grander master plan town-wide, that would be ideal. Otherwise, we may be coming to a future town meeting, depending on how that trends.
Can you pause real quick there, because that goes back a little bit, that question towards you. I have a foggy memory of talking about goals and discussing the difference between master planning and strategic planning. We saw earlier, you mentioned strategic. Is there anything you want to contribute here, or do you want to wait on what the difference is in your mind between the two?
Well, I mean, the strategic plan is a different outlook because master plan has such a specific connotation in according to a municipality. So I just think the distinction of the language is basically meant to be something that's more collaborative and simplistic as opposed to a grand master plan, which is a very specific kind of municipal document that I was not referring to when I made that distinction. So I'd love to be involved as much as possible, but I think all three of us want to be involved in, in updating or recreating or creating a new master plan at some time. Because 22 years ago, it's a very different world we're living in right now. So,
No, I think, strategic initiatives really come down to, getting back into, some tri-board conversations, select board, school committee, finance committee, and others potentially, but, generally speaking, the strategic plan is going to come through that in the municipal.
Sorry, Ken, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to say, when I was talking about a strategic plan, I was thinking along the lines of sort of higher level capital planning with respect to things like how does debt get funded? Is it get funded through the omnibus, or is it funded as excluded debt? Because we could go either direction. But I just think as a general rule, thinking about things like that. And then also finding a mechanism by which some of the bigger projects could be vetted and understood, because at the present time there really isn't a mechanism to do that. So we're looking at updating, a new school or a new library and things like that, and being able to put those things into a context. That's kind of the vision that I had when I made those comments initially. How that manifests, I'm not exactly sure yet, but at the same time, I think those are the kinds of things that I was thinking about, which is a little bit slightly different than, a master plan.
Fair enough. Good. Thanks. Good, Tina.
I just wanted to add, on the master plan there, you wouldn't mind throwing it back up again, Chris? So it was digitized, it dates from 1999. It is our master plan. I'm looking for agreement from you or disagreement, but in my mind, what we had from 1999 is our current active master plan. It obviously needs to be reviewed, but I just I want to be careful in the words that we choose. I would not want to think that those doing business with the town of Holliston and those serving on our boards and committees think that we do not have a master plan. So I just want, no one's spoken otherwise, but I just want to take this opportunity to recognize that we have a master plan,
Good point.
albeit one that was written on a typewriter and has to be taken to Staples and digitized to be uploaded.
Probably a dot matrix printer, not necessarily.
You're probably right.
Anything else?
Have you arrived at the end, or do you have more?
This is the end.
This is the end, my friend. Okay, so, great job on that. I appreciate the media review. It's, I think it's a good opportunity for us to just sit back and watch the kind of work the town administrator is doing on our behalf as we achieve our goals, work towards, the end of the fiscal year, and anticipate any challenges that might be coming. So, I know you mentioned at some point you're gonna come back to us with a quarterly report on select board activities.
Yes, yes.
A little echo going on here, so maybe some
Yeah, there's
some work
gonna be
some overlap, but
Yeah.
we look forward to hearing from. But that's good stuff, and I really appreciate you putting that together, Travis. Great content, and thank you. Do you have anything else to add in your comment from the town administrator this week?
No.
You do not. We will move then to the next item on our agenda, which is the FY22 budget and revenue preparation and review.
All right, so I'm going to ask, and then I believe we have Robert Wideneck and Peter Barbieri with us. So I would ask them to go first, but let me just kick this off with a discussion that I think we've had a little bit, but I just want to sort of look big picture of where we are, and the chair mentioned this earlier. And so you have this in a little bit greater detail, but this is just sort of an overview of revenue. So in looking at 22 and where we are, you know, on the bottom there, you see all the other sort of revenues that we generally have, and some of them are more on the October timeline when it comes to free cash. But on the top here, and then everything above the yellow is sort of what we look at when it comes to general fund revenue. So, you know, looking at property tax, you are looking at the capacity, right? And we don't always want to go to that, but that's sort of what we're working with. The excluded debt dropping ties with actual debt coming off our books, and so it's actually a positive, not a negative, when it comes to declining revenue. On the state aid, I'm still going under the assumption that the UGGA, the unrestricted government aid within our state aid, will drop by 20%. That's what this number is based on, but the Chapter 70 will be flat. That's my assumption. I think relatively soon, as early, quite frankly, as the first week in February, the state may begin to sort of realign and begin to put out a message on 22. That's what I'm waiting for. Because I think, you know, depending on what is going to come from the stimulus package, once the administration turns over, will allow the state to sort of be made whole on their concerns and what they had to do with their rainy day fund, and then begin to project out to towns that state aid will be flat, in which case we may be able to better align this. I don't think we can factor in a substantial growth by any means, but by not factoring in reduction in UGGA is a substantial impact to our budget. So right now I have that in there for conversation part, just so that, you know, to give you a big picture look before we get into budget. The MSBA is tied again to debt. This is the last year of that revenue source, and it goes away in 23, but it goes away with the debt. When it comes to local receipts, this is relatively conservative. I'm increasing it back up from the 21 level that was dropped because of COVID, but it is still, you know, lower than actuals that we'd received prior, with the exception of the solar, which I've added here just for your viewing. I think we still have time to determine what number we want to put within 22, but right now I have $150,000. We'll have a better look after Thursday, and moving forward, I know it's a little small, I apologize. And then, so the bottom line with all of that is essentially a 1.5% potential increase in revenue, which will change again as we get better clarity on state aid, as we more refine the solar number that we feel comfortable putting in for 22.
What's the 30,000 pilot for? That's not the solar pilot, right?
Is that marijuana?
No, there are other pilots that we have in town. I can find out specifically what those are for, but that would not be the pilot for solar. Right now, I have solar all as sort of one line.
That's, okay, so it's, all three of those prongs are bundled into the 150
Yes.
for the placeholder?
Yes.
Got it.
that's
Okay, gotcha, thank you.
Because, you know, in the long run, we're gonna be looking at a total of $500,000 per year on revenue once it's up and running, but we certainly are not in that place for 22. And then we'll also, as I talked about, one of the net metering potentially being a different, space anyway.
Cut our height out of power.
Okay. Yeah, I can get you the information on what the pilot is in there. But anyway, so this is just to set the table, and we'll continue to revisit this as we get new information, anytime that it's updated, so that you kind of have a big picture as we go into budgets.
So you're looking at conservatively about a 1.5%, a little over that increase in revenue.
Yes. Yep, and that will obviously increase based on state aid information, solar information. And then the only thing I would mention for that is that, you know, the excluded debt number dropping impacts that, right? It comes off of the 1 million. In reality, that is offset also by debt, but we'll look at that when we look at both aspects of it. I just wanted to give you a revenue picture.
And there is, the host community agreement, is that in here?
It is not. No, HCA's have not been in the local receipt assumption. It would be factored into, it
General,
ends up in,
is it become a general fund receipt that goes to free cash? Is that how she's doing it?
essentially, yeah. So we can discuss that as well. And as I mentioned, on that specific category, we have two set amounts that we have coming in for 21, and we can project 22, and then we're following up on the other ones that have started operations, and then after 14 to 18 months, we'll need to begin to also pay based on percent of gross revenue. So I'll be bringing all that information as well. So you just take that down, Chris. So I would start, as I said, because we have two gentlemen with us in respect of their time and that they just had to sit through my mid-year review. If we could start with either Rail Trail or EDC, the chair would like to go into either of those.
At this point, the economic, did you want me to dive into this or allow them to do it?
Either way.
Why don't we let the Economic Development Committee to go first? Peter, if you're ready, you can introduce the budget issues.
Chris, will you put that one up?
Yeah. Good evening. The budget is fairly simple. As you know, we had a request for level funded. So we have maintained our $200 in supplies. All the rest of the money, the $13,867, is all in the one line item. As you know, we no longer have staff. We're trying to work, and Travis has been helpful to talk to Hopkinton, but they're not in the scenario of doing a shared position at this stage of the game. So we'll continue to pursue that and continue to pursue staffing the position. It's clearly the committee's position that we need a professional on board to assist us and to assist the town in looking for grants and master plans and all those type of things. So we've left everything in one line item that whenever determination is made as to a consultant or personnel, we'll have the funds to do that. We continue to be members in the Milford Chamber and Metro West Chamber. And basically we've got minimum amount for supplies of $200. So fairly simple. We are taking steps. I don't know if the committee will talk about some type of a meeting. If you recall, when we did the website, we had a little presentation of ourselves in the website at the golf course with the grant legislation, and we're going to be talking about that at our next meeting. Whether we want to talk about having some type of event, invite banks and businesses to see if we can get donations for that grant program, that may be something we do. But otherwise, the budget will probably be just for the purposes of getting somebody on board to assist in what we need.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions, Beth?
My only question for you, Peter, thank you, this is very straightforward, but with respect to the grant program, would you need any additional administrative services, or are you pursuing through the professional services you're looking at now, will that cover it?
Yeah, I mean, we get minutes of the meetings, which I would do, and in myself and other members have chipped in where we've had to do a letter in support. So right now, we're not using any, administrative or secretarial help, no.
Okay, well, so what I'm asking is just a little bit more nuanced than that, not just the minutes, but just like, in terms of like administering the grant program and making sure the accounting and things like that. Is the assumption that the town's gonna do it, or are you taking over some of that in the professional services?
It depends upon the sophisticated nature of what we need, but, if it's simple stuff, I think the committee will step up and do it. Otherwise, we'll have to try to make arrangements and see what staff or anything else we can get it done with.
You said?
Yeah.
Tina?
No, well, just a point of clarification as I look at this. So in FY '20, there was $10,579 for administrative salaries. That was for the town planner who was supporting the committee. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and so what you've done is you've shifted that cost to professional services, anticipating that you'll hire somebody to support the committee in the future.
Yep.
Okay.
So that was just for, and it was part of, the change going into the budget. So the town accountant looked at that and said, it gives a little bit more flexibility, right? So when it's in administrative salaries, it was going to a specific person on payroll. When it's in professional services, now you're in an area where, we can get into paying another community for a joint agreement. We can get into paying somebody who would receive a 1099 rather than a W-2 type scenario. And that was the thought going into the 21 cycle. And I think going into 22, seeing as nothing's changed, we don't necessarily think it's going to be somebody on payroll in Holliston. It still makes sense to have it in this particular area rather than administrative salaries. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay. And Peter, I just wanted to have you pass along, if you would, to Matt Coletti. It was really helpful to have him on the call this afternoon with 9 Green Street. He shared a lot of great comments, and I definitely appreciated having him there.
I'm sorry, what was that?
She's extending her gratitude for Matt Coletti's participation this morning on a call on 9 Green Street. Peter, I have a follow-up question. Are you all set?
I am.
Do you have any plans to post the position of supporting the Economic Development Committee, either as a personal services or purchase service item? Has that happened?
It will happen. We're still talking about kind of what we see the role as. So once we finalize the code job description, bearing in mind that we're talking, probably half-time or less. So we really have to be realistic as far as what we're going to make the job description, where we've only got that limited amount of funds. But once we get a job description, then yeah, we would, if we can't find a consultant to do it, which I don't think makes a lot of sense, we'd post for a person to fill it, hired by the town.
So I would impose some kind of EDC deadline on developing that, Peter, because you folks are going to have to make a decision on where this money stands. Is that right, Travis? He's going to have to put this in either a 5100 series or a 5200 series. Right now, it's parked under.
Yeah, otherwise it would require mid-year in 22 to be moved.
Yeah. So, Pete, I wouldn't wait too much longer before you make the decision on what you want. It's going to be a posted position.
Yeah.
That money's got to move from where it is right now. Go ahead, Ben.
Just a comment to follow up on that. Actually, this is probably more for Travis than for Peter. Are there any other committees that are looking for something like this that they could piggyback with, so that way maybe they could find a little bit more hours or pay? I'm just curious if there's anybody else who might need some services like this.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. I mean, Travis did talk to Hopkinton. They have a part-time position. They're not interested as far as this budget cycle. Another neighboring town, I want to identify which one I spoke with, they have a part-time person, but she was not interested in kind of splitting jobs or increasing time. So I'm not aware of any other community that is looking to do anything. I don't know if you folks have.
I was thinking in our community if there's anybody else who might.
So my only concern with that is that it's not just administrative support. I mean, we are looking for somebody with some background in economic development that could push forward some initiatives that the group has looked at.
Okay.
Get into, some grant opportunities and those things. If it were a strictly part-time temporary type position like we've seen in other areas, I think, we could certainly find something. I'm not sure, and this, Peter can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure based on their conversations and what they're trying to get into,
Yeah.
if that level of support would really help them move anything forward.
Got it. Okay, just throwing that out there. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll certainly make a decision before, April or whatever.
Well, this evening we'll take a motion to approve your budget as submitted at $14,067. I guess the question is, where are we gonna land it eventually? If it's gonna move, Travis, you'll have to come back and let us know.
Sure.
That's okay. Is the board prepared to make a motion on the budget presented, for the Economic Development Committee?
I'll make a motion to approve a budget of $14,067 for the Economic Development Committee.
Second it?
I will second it. Just with a question for you, John. So are you saying that if we do move it, we have to re-vote it because or are we just gonna vote on the total amount and it could be moved?
I think we will re-vote it based on whatever information Hearn brings back to us, if it does in fact move into personal services.
Okay.
All set?
Yep.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thanks, Peter, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the interest of priorities, let's go to the rail trail folks. Robert's with us, Ken's with us. If you'd like to present your rail trail budget for FY22, we'd love to hear from you. Good evening.
Good evening. As you mentioned, Ken Henderson is also on this call because he was instrumental in getting the first set of funding. But we're seeking another $1,000 level funded expense for the rail trail, mainly for the maintenance of the trail. To date, we've had some expenses with some various the golf cart maintenance equipment, chainsaws and the like. And so going forward, we'll probably have those types of costs as well. And we are also keeping in mind that whenever we have a major type of a project, we'll go after different funding, such as the Mass Trails grant program or using our friends of, some of the larger projects such as railing projects and the like. But we're basically just a minor amount of $1,000 is what we're looking for, carrying it again this year for that same amount. Ken, I don't know if you want to add anything further.
Actually, we are proposing, again, the level funded 1,000, but if we can get accomplished everything that we set before us to do, we'll consume most of what is currently in our budget as well as the additional 1,000. So we're looking pretty aggressively at some other projects that the trail needs in order to keep the maintenance up and to keep the other projects going, such as drainage issues. So we do have a lot of plans for where we're going with the level funded 1,000.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll start with Mrs. Farrell with any questions.
I don't have any questions. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Tina?
Well, no, just a comment. I would say I'm always surprised that $1,000 gets you, your committee and the work you do as far as you get with it. So, no questions, but just a sense of amazement for all that you accomplish on $1,000.
Thank you, Tina. I would second that. The only thing I would direct, and not under these circumstances, Travis, is, looking at the rail trail as a horizontal park system, if you will, is the town doing enough to maintain the asset? Clearly, through the volunteer labor and yeoman work that Ken and Robert have been able to pull together, the trail is coming along quite well. But holistically, is this the right model going forward? If I'm not mistaken, that 1,000 was created pretty much, I don't want to say spontaneously by the Finance Committee, but certain as a last-minute reaction to recognize that there needs to be some financial commitment by the town towards the trail, and I think a plan to maintain it should include something beyond $1,000 a year. Sort of maybe that's part of your 5-year view that you talked about earlier. But notwithstanding that, I'm straightforward, as Tina said, it's amazing what $1,000 can do. It's amazing. So at this point, without any other comments, go ahead, Travis.
I would just put into the conversation one that we just had last week, I think it might have been before, on license agreements with businesses along the trail and potentially having license fees. That money, as the conversation that I had with Robert and Ken previously, is set, once that system is in place to go into the general fund. And it might be, a good time at that point to sort of look at revenue being brought into the general fund to support, rail trail to then go to the benefit of the rail trail. I think that would be a natural progression of sort of moving this budget into a place where it can add to more planning potential for the group to work with. So I don't know if the budget 22 cycle is the conversation to have that, but I think moving ahead, especially once those are in place, we can certainly revisit that conversation.
Great. I'll entertain a motion to approve the FY22 funding budget for the rail trail at $1,000.
So moved.
Second that?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It carries. Robert, Ken, thanks for all the great work you do. We hope you have a great night. Thanks for hanging in there with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, board.
All right. Is there anybody else on the Zoom that's going to contribute towards budget this evening that we want to knock out, Travis, before we get?
Yeah, Matt Zedek
Matt Zedek, here we are.
will support me.
Good evening, Matt. How are you?
Sustainability and solid waste. So, if you can pull up sustainability first, Chris.
Matt, I think you have to unmute.
Yep. Hi, folks, and Mr. Chairman and the members of the board.
Good evening. How are you?
Great. Hey, thanks for the opportunity to be in front of you. In just a few days, I'm pleased that it'll be 1 year since coming on board as your sustainability coordinator. So I'd really like to thank the advocates who did the groundwork to help create the position in the first place, and the town officials and the town meeting members who supported the position. So this is pretty much a pretty simple, straightforward budget request. The one figure in the budget relates to the contracted services at $50,000. So that would remain the same as requested. And there are several items listed in the narrative. Looking forward to FY22 and happy to answer any questions that the members of the board may have.
Start with you, Ben, if you have any questions on the sustainability budget for FY22.
I think two things. I think the first thing is first of all, well, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate all the things that you do, and we've certainly had some great conversations, the two of us. I think having you as part of this community is important. There's a lot of things that we've certainly seen, and there's a lot of things even more behind the scenes that we haven't, that you're doing to help make this community more sustainable, to coin a phrase. And I think it's just very important that we do emphasize things like recycling and conservation in wherever possible. I mean, we have had conversations about electricity and natural gas, and you've found us some wonderful savings through those initiatives over time. But I think what's important too is that we emphasize not just the savings in terms of the cost, but also in terms of the use. And I think it's important that we emphasize those things. So I want to thank you and commend you for those initiatives, and look forward to more of them in the future. I think the only other thing is just basically a kind of a general comment is, so we have this money for purchase services, but I think, I would throw out there too, is there other opportunities that we might be missing that we could get out there that are sort of beyond grants that the town might need to invest some of money in, either from a revolving account or in terms of spending within the omnibus. So, is there anything you can think of specifically, Matt? I know we've talked a lot about streetlights, but that's a different animal. But is there anything out there? Is there any potential out there that we might look to try to, maybe not in this budget cycle, maybe in future budget cycles, at expanding this budget to be a little bit more than just paying for salaries? Well, not salaries.
Thanks for the feedback. And to build on those conversations we've had, I think it's something definitely to be looking for in the future. Again, it's a relatively new position. One of the things I've enjoyed, and some of the other towns in the area that also have sustainability coordinators are also, they're relatively new positions. There are a few, like in Natick, where the person's been on board for about 5 years, so it's been good, and I'll continue to look at how they've been branching out their offices in those regards. The one area in particular that you mentioned, the revolving fund, is something Travis has also mentioned earlier in the meeting that we've been talking about and looking forward to trying to create in the relatively near future, so we can have some additional ways to move the programs forward in a time-efficient manner, and also in a way that can really track the funds so that we just know they're being used efficiently. So I think that's the short answer for the near term, but I'll keep looking for the long term as well.
Great. Thank you. That's all.
Tina.
Yes, Matt, I think my comments are appreciation, hopes, and dreams here. With the street lighting budget, with the solid waste budget, your fingerprints are all over it in a good way in bringing about change that benefited our electricity usage and our solid waste production and management of that. So, appreciation for your efforts there. I think you have a lot of behind-the-scenes work that we will come to realize as we go through some budgets here. I look forward in the next week, I hope, to contact you about water rates and water conservation efforts. We have that hearing coming up, and that's been on my to-do list, and I need to get a hold of you on that. You are involved with the 9 Green Street efforts. I'm sure that will grow over time. I think you're going to have a really significant impact there as well. Looking into the future, I think that additional solar projects, I think working with Ben perhaps, with the DPW facility on conservation efforts there and improvements from what we have now and what we ought to have in the future for a sustainable approach is worthwhile exploring. And then, did I say it already, dams? Did I say that? Dams and solar projects is where I was going. I hope to see you address those moving forward. I think they're both big items where Holliston could really stand to make some gains. So that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, great feedback. I appreciate it. Matt, really not a lot of critical feedback. I share the enthusiasm of my colleagues for the work that you're doing. I think it was envisioned when the position was created. I guess what I'd like to ask the board, my colleagues right now, is if they see some collective wisdom to possibly partner the sustainability coordinator contract under the facility manager. Travis and I had a brief conversation about that, and I wanted to open it up to a conversation this evening to see if they see some benefits to having the two collaborate more closely. As I understand it, currently the sustainability coordinator reports to the town administrator. But as you look at the FY22 goals and objectives, there is a fair amount of overlap between the two positions, one being a staff position, one being a contractor. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I see collaboration everywhere in the work that they do. So between the energy aggregation plans and the work on Green Street, I've seen nothing but collaboration. So if you're looking to formalize that by moving it under the facility manager budget,
and that's certainly one Travis's feedback too, but just throwing it out there for a conversation.
they seem like a good married couple.
Take it.
On that note,
down the aisle.
No, I think, either they definitely do work a lot together, and that's certainly, talking to one, you're often talking to the other, and encouraging them to work together. I think, one of the things I think about budgets is that it's a reflection of the values of the community. The only thing I would be concerned about doing that would be is I want to make sure that people understand and recognize the emphasis on sustainability. If it gets buried with the facilities manager, it might get a little bit lost in there. And then additionally, I'm not sure some of the logistics. If we did go with a revolving fund, if there are other pieces, does that complicate things? And I just don't. I don't want to overcomplicate it by doing something that seems undercomplicated. I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And this is, I think it's a great concept, and I think they definitely work well together. And I see them as, in terms of how they're paid, it's a little bit different, but certainly like co-equal kind of figures in terms of managing the community. So I think I'm interested to hear what Travis thinks about it,
Yeah,
but that's sort of my feedback on it.
Travis, any thoughts?
Well, so that, I think the way Tina and Ben were responding was based on the budget structure. Were you talking about rolling it under in the budget or rolling it under in like an org chart?
One would follow the other, I would think.
Okay. So on the budget side, I think because we have them both set up, and to Ben's point, if we're going to move towards, any sort of revolving fund or anything in the future, having it still by itself makes sense in that they're so new. In a reporting structure, this town really lacks an org chart. I think to the points that were made, those two positions work, relatively collaboratively, and the fact that we have one of them as a full-time employee and one position is sort of contracted. I think you could certainly do that, but again, with a contracted person, would they even fall on the org chart? I'm certainly open to sort of presenting you with how that would look and going from there. From the budget of FY22, I think leaving them separate, just understanding that there may be a different structure beyond 22 probably makes sense at the moment.
Well, they would be separate. I mean, they'd have lines within a facility's budget. One is for the facility manager, then this one would fall under purchase services, such that would still be a line item. You'd identify it. I guess there is an interest in seeing what that looks like for FY22. If you feel as though it's something that's beneficial. On the other hand, if you feel as though there's some reason not to do it, just report back. One of the main reasons I'm thinking of doing it is you've got a lot on your plate. Directly supervising somebody, it's a burden, and not that massive burden, but in this case, if there's some symbiotic relationship between the employee who can oversee the contract, maybe there's some efficiency there, and I think that's what generated the conversation. All right, now think about it. I don't think it changes what we're going to approve tonight for the sustainability contract. So, Matt, I'll give you a chance to contribute any feedback if you have on that particular topic, if you have any. If not, we'll move ahead with your budget at this point. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's certainly worthy of consideration, but I absolutely need to point out two things. I greatly enjoy working with James, but I'm a happily married man at the moment.
Duly noted. Tina, all the way. You own that, Tina. I will entertain a motion to approve the sustainability.
Well, he said two things. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, John. Did you have a second comment you wanted to add?
All set, thank you.
Oh, okay.
So we will entertain a motion to approve the $50,000 sustainability coordinator budget for FY22 under purchase services, location TBD, based on what Travis Ahern reports back. And that is our motion.
So moved.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Thank you.
Thanks.
Matt. Thank you, Matt. All the best. Thanks for joining us tonight.
I think he'll be sticking around a little bit on a couple of the solid waste and he's been contributing to, and I've been kicking with him. So on streetlights and solid waste, whichever one pops up first on your list there, Chris, I'm open to either. Street lighting, all right. That's a good one. Okay, so a couple things here I just want to point out, because I've heard this conversation sort of since I came into town on the LED aspect of streetlights. So my concern with that, and I have nothing factored, the reason I start off with that is that I have nothing factored in for that particular concept in the 22 request. Right. So within the 22 request, the street lighting has been broken out structurally into three categories. That happened about a year ago at the request of the Finance Committee. I think it works. So it's into energy and utilities, it's into the electricity, and then it's into equipment maintenance. And so one of the components that I want to say why I'm saying LED streetlights is not into this. The question is there a savings if we were to go into trying to obtain LED streetlights in town? Yes, there would be a savings potentially in the energy consumption and the cost that we pay for that energy. However, the structural, the logistics of that is that we would essentially need to take ownership of the streetlights and then be responsible for maintenance. So to me, where the liability that we would add for for the gains of the LED are not necessarily going to at all make the ROI make sense. Now, I can certainly pursue what it would take to sort of limit our liability in that, but that's my initial concern with approaching it. So again, this budget is set up with no sort of assumption of any change in that, and I think that conversation we can have tonight and moving forward. The things that I did put in here are based on sort of, you know, the fact that we do have our new electric rates, which is going to impact some of this. I've factored that in. And, you know, looking at, again, so for the equipment maintenance, we have quite a bit of fluctuation in that particular aspect of this. When we are paying for maintenance, it is going, generally speaking, to bell traffic signal maintenance that we pay on average about $575 per call. Although when we have larger needs, like in FY20, you will see a spike. If you could actually go down, Chris, to the budget, one more down to the other view. So this is two views. This is the standard view that you're used to. So if you look at equipment maintenance, that third line down, the expenditures within FY20, you see the $10,000 spike. So right now, the $5,500 assumption for 22, which is the same as 21, presents a bit of a liability, right? We could certainly see an overage there. But if we're able to keep it to historic, this budget at $67,470, which is a slight decrease over the prior year, I think is reflecting the work that we've done to sort of control costs in this area, with the only, again, liability being that equipment maintenance that I can't necessarily fully predict. Two other things I just want to put in here in terms of risk is that Mayflower Landing is one that we've sort of come to. They asked for the ability to essentially waive street lighting. The realization is that that's not necessarily in the best interest of the neighbors, so the select board did not grant that waiver. That means that at some point in the future, we're going to have lights there that did not previously exist on, those are going to get turned over when the road is accepted. I have nothing in here for that, on the assumption that is not going to get tied up in time, that it's going to impact our 22, but that could, in which case, that would impact this as well. This also assumes no new stop lights that would require power, although, things have gone into tax. So I'm not assuming anything in this, and I don't foresee anything in 22 along those lines.
Questions, Mrs. Farrell? So I understand about the LEDs. It's something I know I've certainly discussed, and I wish we could do it, but I understand the ROI, so I don't want to necessarily spend money for the sake of spending money. But one question I have was with respect to new lights that are put online. Are they going to be LED, or are we continuing to use just the existing, are new lights LED, I guess is the question.
Matt may be able to contribute to this conversation, but so I guess the problem, right, with these, the ones that we're talking about being able to switch, is that, they're sort of owned by Eversource, and therefore, they don't necessarily see a benefit of changing it, right? It just reduces our bill and their capital costs. Although I think, I do intend to pursue Eversource through DPU is required to do certain things on an annual basis to be making progress towards more energy efficiency. So, if we can do anything to sort of force their hand to do that, I think I will certainly pursue that. On new lights, I'm not aware of the regulations of what they're needed. It may be the case that they are, and it may be the case that through anything through the planning board with that developer that it could be specified that they must be. But Matt, are you aware of anything that would sort of force those to be LED?
No, as far as I'm aware, they replace them with the high pressure sodiums. As you pointed out, they don't have the incentive like we would. But I also want to point out that the one relative to Ben's question, with the work that James helped do with the aggregation of the electricity, at least even though we don't have the LEDs as the light fixtures, it is a renewable source of electricity that's going for the streetlights. We have made that improvement in the last several months.
Great point. And my question actually was referring to not necessarily a replacement of bulbs, but more like if we're putting up a new light in a new location, is it going to be the sodium orange monstrosities? Like, for example, I had a light near my house, and then the pole was knocked down, and then the light was gone. If they decided to replace that fixture with a new fixture, would it be an LED bulb or would they use a sodium bulb? That's more what I'm asking, not necessarily bulb replacement.
Do you have anything on that, Matt?
As far as I'm aware, Eversource would replace it with a high-pressure sodium, but I'll follow up and check on that, Ben, for sure.
Yeah, and then the question on Mayflower is that these would be brand new lights installed for a new development. So I guess the question would be what needs to go on that. I can follow up on that as well.
That's kind of what I'm saying. So I'd love to see LEDs too. I just think like the orange lights, they're outdated, they're gross, they're disgusting, but I understand like if it becomes a liability for the town, it's not necessarily a good decision financially.
Yeah.
Just a better decision in terms of sustainability and energy usage. So,
Tina.
Yeah, there are two things, and this goes to tracking the good work, the good effort of people in town hall, and to your point about controlling costs. We had around $45,000 awarded to us through the Green Communities Grant that was going to replace 137 lights up at the golf course. When that came forward, the estimated cost savings was $7,381 per year. I could be wrong. I would have expected to have seen that reflected in the street lighting budget.
No, Pinecrest Lights is going to be reflected in the public buildings budget.
Yep.
So we will have a public buildings structural conversation that I actually have a meeting with a number of staff on tomorrow before that comes to you. But utilities for natural gas and electricity for Town Hall, 1750, and Pinecrest are three separate lines within the public buildings budget. The public buildings budget is going to interface with any changes that we may be looking at for the facilities manager budget development. And so we have certainly the ability to look at how we want to handle that in the 22 budget and potentially make changes, but that would not be in the street light budget.
Then I assume you're going to say the same thing about the $65,000 savings that we got to our lower supply rates, to our electrical aggregation. The electrical aggregation, the town side of the aggregation plan for lower supply rates.
So on the town side,
probably
what we locked into the facilities manager, there is a component that impacts streetlights, right? And that has been factored in here.
Yeah.
But of the whole package that was what James presented on the savings for town-wide, the town buildings component, right? This is the streetlights specifically. The town buildings component is in a separate.
Understood. So when we see 3,000 reduction, 3,000 or 5% reduction there in electricity,
That is a main
charges,
component of James Keith's locking us in. Yep.
got it. All right, that's it. Thank you.
The only question I have is you, Travis, you mentioned that converting to LED may not be a good ROI because you have to own the new light standard. That's news to me. Is that part of what you understand be the agreement with the light company, that they won't simply, using Ben's example, when a power line goes down, they won't simply upgrade it to LED and move on? Or if we provide them money, they won't simply upgrade the light fixture and everyone lives on happily ever after? We actually have to take ownership. That's a dynamic I was not aware of.
That's my understanding.
Very good. In this case, I will entertain a motion to approve the FY22 budget for street lighting at $67,470.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes. Travis, I'll take your guidance on which one you want to do next.
Yeah, if we can move to solid waste next, and then we'll let Matt go. This one is sort of the largest that we'll discuss tonight. It has a lot more moving components. And again, I appreciate Matt Zedek reviewing this and going back and forth. This is a bit of a compromise. It is an increase. There's again some changes in 22. Matt and I have been looking quite a bit at the Harvey's contract, which is the largest component of this. And I put that up top there. So this is FY22 will mark the start of the third year of the 5-year contract that was put in place. The initial results were positive, as we've been discussing through COVID and CARES. We have been impacted. We've seen impacts from people being at home with the bulk pickups and the white goods pickups. White goods, if you're not aware, because I don't think it's a very effective name, but it's what they call it, is sort of the appliances that people put out on the curb. And so those have increased, and that has increased our costs, and we are factoring that in going ahead. I think we have to factor in that people are going to continue to do these things, right? We've seen a benefit from people being at home. They've engaged the building department with permits quite a bit, and that's impacted revenue on one side. There are costs on the other side that have come from people being at home quite a bit, and solid waste is one of them. The disposal expenses, the tipping fees of Wheelabrator, and this is based on trend analysis, quite a bit that Matt has put together, but also, you saw quite a bit of the background related to that when you approved the offset for CARES, which was tied, again, to people being at home and creating more waste into our stream. The other ones that impact this, there is an increase for the hazardous materials collection day. That is one that I think, from Matt observing and I think feedback that we've received, we could improve the service level there if we make a couple minor tweaks that don't affect majorly the bottom line. At the same time, understanding this budget as it's been presented goes up, that's one that, we could look at to wait to a future time to increase it once we have, we've approached the conversation with the revolving fund, as we were talking about earlier with the recycling center. So if we needed to, adjust this budget in 22 because of cost concerns, this represents a $5,000 increase that is specifically intended to increase service level. Metals collection, cardboard collection, these are called out slightly differently than in previous years, but this is based on, actual operations. Again, the goals of this department, now that we have facilities manager, sustainability coordinator, getting into what will be their second years on the job essentially in town, is to improve the flow of operations. I had the opportunity to do a walk through the recycling center with the DPW director, highway superintendent, and those two previous people that I mentioned in regards to the solar project. And I think everybody kind of has ideas of how we can make this work better for residents, and we're trying to sort of work towards that. I think that's been great addition to that. He'll continue to pursue grant opportunities. What was mentioned, I think, in the sustainability budget was, it might be mentioned here, is a recycling grant that he's gotten, and we'll continue to go for those types of things. One thing that we're targeting and looking out for when it comes to FY22 is DEP's new approach to mattresses that could potentially increase our costs. And Matt can get into that if you have further questions. The only thing I would mention also is if, in the long run, what we want to do is begin to increase service level at the recycling center specifically. Right now what we're doing is part-time staff through the DPW. That is something that could be rolled into potentially a revolving fund as we move forward. That would allow us to potentially be open more hours, which is a benefit to residents. And certainly something that we've heard feedback on that would be appreciated. But right now in the 22 cycle, I'm not anticipating more hours of operation. That's a conversation I think we would have with the revolving fund. This is specifically based on the current operations we have, with a tweak or two to the hazardous materials collection day. And if you'd like, Matt can sort of specify on the mattress issue.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, do you mind getting into DEP's mattress changes?
Sure. This is their latest proposed change to the waste bans. Again, this is their state's version of trying to avoid it being an unfunded mandate. Instead of saying we have to recycle these items such as electronics, tires, white goods, they say that we're not allowed to toss them out as trash. So the next one on their list, they're hoping to implement this coming fall, is having mattresses and box springs not be allowed to be put out as trash and be disposed of as trash. That's currently how they're handled in Holliston and many other communities. Extremely costly item to take out of the waste stream. The state has had a grant program in place for the last 4 or 5 years trying to increase the number of disposal sites that will recycle mattresses. There are only 3 or 4 locations like that in the Commonwealth 4 or 5 years later. Despite that grant program, it's still a very expensive item to recycle, but the state's seems to be moving forward with implementing this grant and this waste ban in the fall. So the costs are unknown in large part because of the lack of disposal markets. And that's why we had, at this point in the budget, had to try to come up with at least a rough estimate on what it would cost. Additional discussions should take place with our collection vendor and the DEP and some other communities to see if there are some more cost-effective ways we can manage these particular items if the waste ban comes to play this fall.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Any questions on the solid waste budget, Mrs. Sproul?
So this is great. I really like seeing a breakdown and sort of an understanding of the drivers here. It's just not this massive number that we don't really understand what's going on, and trying to think about different ways to respond to components within waste with respect to things like recycling and such. My only question is related to, now this is going based on memory, and so I apologize if I'm not thinking about this right, but every year, I believe the high school seniors do like a collection. They do like a, hey, come by with a truck full of trash if you need stuff collected, and we'll fill up some dumpsters. Because I know I did it once because I had like a lot of styrofoam that I couldn't get rid of. This question, I guess, for Matt. Have we looked at sort of what's going on with with that particular event, like who's coming in, what kinds of things are going in? Because I guess what I'm wondering is there a little bit of pent-up demand where people are lining up to throw things out, or is it unique to this year? Because I want to think that what happened this year, they had to close it down because there were too many people trying to throw things out at one point because the line was so long. So I'm wondering, I'm not saying that that's a massive event that's going to necessarily change the solid waste budget in any dramatic way, but I am wondering if there's sort of like there's a little bit of pent-up demand for certain kinds of waste disposal or recycling or something like that people aren't really finding a method for it sitting in a garage or something like that. So I just was wondering if we've looked at that particular event and wondered if there's anything we need to do in terms of expanding or changing services.
To your point, Ben, the high school, some good folks at the high school, I think it was about a month ago, actually had 2 consecutive weekends where they had the type of collections you're talking about. And it was I think it was a great success. That's why they had this second event. So thanks to those folks who are helping to get some of the items out of the trash stream and to generate a little revenue for the folks at the high school. There's a significant need to try to increase the number of reuse opportunities for some of these especially bulk items that we're talking about. So it's something we'll continue to look at and try to work on. It's hard, and that's one of the factors we've brought into play in terms of the discussion about the recycling center and possible future needs. Is there a space up there for oftentimes they're called swap shops when towns have these type of programs where you're trying to basically have things reused. If you're done with it in your house, instead of just tossing it out, if somebody else can reuse it, that's the best way to go. So we absolutely we'll continue to look at those opportunities. It's the way we should be doing it, and it's a nice way to knock down the trash and the disposal costs.
That's it. Tina.
Yeah, so Matt, in your summary here, or in the document you prepared to support the budget, you tallied the changes to curbside solid waste, curbside recycling, and so on. And I believe this represents the pandemic impact. And net of solid waste stickers and recycling stickers, it's $41,796. So I'm reading that as that is the COVID impact to this budget.
Yes. That was for the months that have already passed.
Okay. There's an increase to this budget that reflects the pandemic for FY22. It's fair to say that if there's another round of CARES Act funding that comes to municipalities, we would potentially look to this difference, this increase in this budget for reimbursement to a second round of CARES Act funding. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
I have no questions, so at this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve the FY22 solid waste proposed budget at $1,318,183.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, I'm just confirming the amount. You're looking at it right up there.
to 1318-183.
Okay, I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Okay, there's solid waste.
The one before I adjusted.
Let's move on. In the spirit of marriages and things like that, as we say goodnight to Matt, maybe we can move on to celebrations this time, if you're up for that.
I am up for that.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Matt.
Good night, Matt.
Good night, folks. See ya.
All right. You'd like to go to celebrations. Okay. So
Like to celebrate, let's just leave it there.
I provided you,
He wants the party. He really does.
I provided you with some backup, in an email form. I also put this together just, sort of to formalize what we're doing here. From what I understand, the primary focus of the celebrations budget is Memorial Day. Formerly, this has been Memorial Day luncheon and then wreaths and flowers. The luncheon obviously is a component during COVID that, has been problematic, and will not be probably done, this May. But planning ahead for FY22, I would hope that we get back to that place. At the same point, the $2,000 does not necessarily reflect the total costs. There are certainly non-tax supported contributions to the costs that are incurred for the Memorial Day celebration. And so, in all, it's about $5,000, and then the $2,000 represents the sort of tax component. And so the request is the same as it was in previous years.
Any questions, Mrs. Farrell? Nope, it's fine.
Well, I'm struck by, Mr. Bradford's letter. Again, he's saying that, so he's not asking for more in this FY22 budget. And so with that in mind, I have no questions to ask.
I do not either, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the celebrations requested FY22 budget of $2,000.
So moved.
Second that?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Next, Steelers weights and measures.
Sure.
You're gonna need to get this one right, Travis.
All right, so $0. The component here that needs to be discussed, I think you do need to do the budget, and you do need to understand the revenues, right? So all this is running through a revolving fund. The only thing I would point out is that we'll be having a further discussion that will be sort of more involved than this $0 budget, in that it's been identified by the sealer to me that in his revolving fund request for 22, which will be in a separate warrant article, he's going to ask for an increase over the standard expense allotment, right? The ceiling is set in a revolving fund on an annual basis by town meeting. He's going to ask for a higher amount for the FY22 request, because what he's running into is the need for more new and specialized equipment when it comes to measuring at the cannabis operations. That is, again, not something that's going to impact this budget or the tax dollar component, because the revenues for the sealer weights and measures is fully supporting through the revolving fund, but you'll see that when we come back with the warrant article for revolving funds.
No vote needed here, correct?
I think you could vote in support of $0, but I suppose
Actually, did have a question about
You have a question? Sure.
Yeah, so just thinking about it, I mean, certainly the cannabis companies could have an impact on it, but I'm noticing with the revolving funds, the balance keeps getting bigger. And I'm just wondering, what are we doing with that? I mean, I understand he needs to buy equipment, he needs to buy whatever he needs in terms of specifics. It's just sort of, if it just keeps getting larger and larger, what does that mean? What is it doing? What's the plan there?
So all revolving funds sort of operate a little bit differently depending on the need and the program that they're supporting. I would say when it comes to something that infrequently buys equipment and then needs to buy expensive and specialized equipment, that what you want to be doing is building a balance, because you're eventually going to expend it relatively to the bone, and then be prepared to not have another request from it for a while.
Okay, and that's fine. And because the nature of this is we haven't seen those large expense. So as long as it has enough and there's sort of a plan for it, I just didn't want it to become something that just keeps growing in perpetuity without any particular mechanism for spending.
One thing to consider with any of the revolving funds is if there's a substantial component where the town staff is supporting the effort of a revolving fund, you can certainly look at the indirect costs and charging a revolving fund for those to support the general fund. in an instance where, you know, if, let's say this, you know, and we do support the sealer weights and measures through our office, so we could look at that. At this point, though, I think as we get into the revolving fund discussion for the warrant article, you know, we can look at that balance and have that conversation.
Okay. That's it.
That's a contract, right?
Yeah.
All right, so no vote needed on that. We'll move on to liability insurance.
All right, our last budget, and just a ton of fun, liability insurance. So Maya picks up our liability insurance. Maya is the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Association. It's sort of the best deal going in town for when it comes to municipalities, although I have been approached by, the private sector is sort of trying to get into this realm, and I think we'll have to certainly do our due diligence on options outside of Maya. At the moment, though, I think they do provide excellent value for us. And I provided to you sort of our risk and loss analysis just for reference, but in reality, our run-ins and our use of insurance, fluctuate from year to year, given a number of different variables. I just put here for your reference sort of the cost when we do need to use our insurance, with the deductibles in each of these areas. We do have general liability that fluctuates depending on the need. That has been relatively helpful. And Maya also has coverage that is not reflected in this budget. It is reflected in the workers' comp budget, which covers our workers' comp and police fire special risk accident insurance. So our police fire is covered also by Maya, but in a different budget. And so I just wanted to highlight those. So we engage them quite a bit. They put on some programs. The facilities managers actually use quite a few of their programs. The police chief will as well. Some of these things when it comes to, avoiding workplace accidents and best practices in the workplace, our employees will go through these. They have cyber elements as well that the IT director has used. And so we also have the opportunity for the grant program Maya has given us. We were awarded the $10,000 towards our due solution that they see as us moving towards better use of our assets that will lead to cost savings from a risk perspective. And they granted us $10,000 through that program towards the due solutions after the fact, right? So we committed to due solutions, and then they did that, which was great. And then if you could scroll down, Chris, to the dollars and cents, what I have factored in here is a 8% increase off of actual. And this is, there is a board meeting that I'll be going to soon, but it is, we've had some loss issues that, are pretty much standard for our line of work, but will be reflected in our costs. And I think this is pretty much, we're going to see this line grow. And we have to do what we can to sort of limit our liability and address any issues, but at the same point, it's, again, the cost of doing business.
Okay.
I think my only question is, so the increase is more of a general increase. It's not tied to any specific pieces of our liability insurance on one particular area.
So they're going to look at us as a particular client, right? They do sort of they do group a number of the costs when it comes to all the communities and those types of things, so that we don't have whatever we lost last year, we're getting slammed the next year kind of thing, right? There is some stability. At the same point, it's kind of, I would view it as sustainable rate increases is kind of their approach to it. And certainly if our loss ratio trends in the right direction, we're going to potentially see, zeros or no increases. At the same point, with the way that we've had to use the insurance for a number of areas that we're covered for, we're going to see our standard increase. Okay.
Okay.
You have here, there's a $2,500 deductible, a $1,000 deductible, and a $7,500 deductible, depending on what the reason is. Where is that deductible paid from? What account is that, or what budget does that come out of? Is that our budget, your budget, the administrator's office, selectboard?
It really depends. So if it's general, it probably will be. But for example, we covered, a fence was broken at a park. We went back and forth a little bit because the fence and park were not specifically called out in our asset list, but it's covered under our open space policy. They covered it. The Parks Department paid for the deductible. Similar, we used, so we had an incident at the police station. It was not covered under insurance. If it had been, the police budget, generally speaking, would cover the deductible for that structure. And then on things that don't fall sort of under any budget category, yeah, the select board would kind of be the last place.
All right, I have no questions, so we'll proceed to a vote on the request for the liability insurance line item for FY '22 at $289,798.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second that?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Travis, I think that completes this week's FY '22 budget revenue preparation and review.
It does.
Just as a reminder, would ask that you come back each week with a populated FY '22 column showing us how we're moving. And one follow-up question, I think this is more of a warrant question, but we did talk about taking the line items in FY '22 and simplifying their presentation within the omnibus. That is more structural for the warrant, is that correct?
It is, so.
We're not voting, we don't have to do anything about that here when we're voting each week on these budgets.
No, so the idea, and Sharon Emmerich has sort of built this in as we're bringing in the departmental requests and keeping them in one central location. Obviously, I'm putting together some supplemental information for you to consider, but in terms of actually tracking, we do have now a tab that will populate it in a way in which we're looking at personal services, operating expenses, and then where appropriate, capital outlay.
Yep.
Rather than having 4 categories for each department. And I'll continue to have that conversation with the finance committee as well.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which is board business. Ben Sparrow, we have meeting minutes here. If you'd like to bring them forth for a vote.
Sure. I will make a motion for the board to approve the meeting minutes of December 21st, 2020, December 28th, 2020, and January 4th, 2021.
I will second that.
I believe we were all present for all three. Is that correct, Jeff? I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries. We have a request to approve some bid documents for well number 5. Is this simply a signature, or do you need a vote on this, Travis?
I think at this point, just a signature will be fine. I think I put this on here for tracking and then didn't take it off, so I don't believe a vote is necessary.
Very good. We will then move to other business. Mr. Sparrow, anything on your mind?
No other business.
Fine.
3 things. Met with Sacred School, the task force today, and Travis, as we advance towards closing the warrant, I'd like to have a conversation about a request for a pedestrian signal at the Woodland Street crosswalk.
Woodland Street.
From Trail to Woodland Street down by the schools. The location is at the Holliston Oil entrance to the passenger.
Isn't there one there?
There is a crosswalk out. The request would be for a pedestrian activated signal, either motion sensor or push button, head crossing, just like we have along the rail trail.
Okay.
All right. And then, when we voted to approve the flat rate with MTC for council,
Okay.
there was talk at the time about a workshop.
Yep.
If we could get an update on that. And then in your mid-year or 6-month review there, I didn't see anything about the economically distressed area, the EDA status that we were applying for. So
That's a good point.
when there's an update, that would be great to hear.
Thank you very much. Is there any other comments from those folks assembled on the Zoom call this evening?
Can I just point out one thing on the workshop component? A couple things that sort of were bounced around, right? So within what we received from Mead, Tellerman, Costa, is, representation from them at 3 board meetings townwide on a monthly basis. That has been dedicated specifically to 555 Hoppingbrook for the foreseeable past. But, certainly we can look at the best way to utilize those moving forward. But the other component was sort of biannual workshops that they can put on. I think, they can be, as broad as sort of covering open meeting law to more, pinpointed type things. So I think discussing what we would like to see, and then I can coordinate with the groups that would be involved in any of those types of talks, and tell them and give us some dates. I think it would be more just sort of what topics do we want to see, and then sort of, going down and seeing what the most priority one will be.
And you would poll committees and boards and committees, or you would poll departments, or both?
It could be for staff, it could be for boards and committees.
Any other comments this evening? I don't see anybody on the Zoom raising their hand, so at this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Have a good evening, Holliston. We will see you this Thursday evening on January 21st for a special discussion about the solar project on Marshall Street. Until then, have a peaceful evening. Good night.